Welcome back. It's week 3 of Creator Spotlight. Are you feeling refreshed? Are you feeling revived from the weekend? Are you ready for another? Well, there's only one stream this week, unfortunately, but it's a good one. So I'm very excited. I'm Carol. I'm your host here on Twitch. Welcome. And this is my lovely co-host, Hassan.
Hello, I'm Hassan, community manager and Twitch co-host for the Creator Spotlight here at Unity.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Creator Spotlight is our entire summer of streaming. This is where we bring awesome Made with Unity creators in to talk about all the different types of games so that we can give back to you, so you can learn how to make your own games. But before we head into today's guest, we should really talk about what you need to prep for your game dev journey. Hassan, take it away.
Yeah, okay, so you may be joining us from Twitter, you may be joining us from Twitch, from Discord, or from the Asset Store. If you're not joining us from the Asset Store today, we currently have the Smash Hit Summer Sale going on. It's live. It's a 6-week sale. Each week has a completely different theme. And this week's theme is the sci-fi sale. So it's all the assets you need to help you build your sci-fi game. And you want to play a trailer from one of the assets that are on sale to give you an example of what we have. So let's check out the sci-fi top-down game template 2.0. Yeah, so really fantastic asset that can help you build so many different types of sci-fi games. You saw over there, you had like a third-person camera, top-down camera, all kinds of features. Another one of my personal favorite assets that's on sale right now is Shapes. It's an incredible, shape building tool that you can build your own UI with it. You can create effects with it, create a whole 2D game using just that tool. Definitely check it out. And so next week we're gonna have the last chance part of this is at the final week of the sale, where we're bringing back all the top assets from the previous weeks to all be on sale at 50% off. So
do we know
for that?
Do we know what those top assets are going to be, or is it going to be a mystery?
Oh, you're going to have to come back and find out.
Of course.
Come back next week.
Unity Asset Store creating a lot of mystery and suspense for us.
Keep you coming back. But for today's show, we have an incredible team with us. We have the team from Variable State who have created Virginia. Today, they're going to be showing us their supernatural narrative adventure game, Last Stop. So we're going to play the trailer for that now, and then we're going to introduce the team and speak to them. Let's cut to that trailer.
Awesome.
Get back here! Don't stop!
This is crazy.
We need to move him. Let's get him inside, out of sight.
Are you a human being? Like me?
Come a little closer.
You two were made for each other.
I just want my body back.
So I feel like I haven't properly explained this. Are you okay traveling to the other side of the galaxy?
I read the brief.
We're making history here, Mina. Resources, technology, culture. This is the next frontier. I'm counting on you, Mina.
All right, I'll get the job done.
Dad! This is not your fault. If it's anyone's, it's mine.
I think I've made a terrible mistake.
If you want my help, you only have to ask.
I gave up everything.
Come on, Hughes. This is it. Don't you want to know what's on the other side?
So speaking of suspenseful mysteries, coming July 2nd, everyone. So make sure you wish list it and get it actually in 2 days. So welcome the team from Variable State. Why don't you introduce yourself, Lyndon? Tell us what you do.
Hello, yes, I'm Lyndon Holland. I suppose one of the roles that I do in the game is music, but also do design and writing, and also one of the company directors.
Lyndon's being very
just a few things.
Yeah, modest. He's also he's a BAFTA award winning.
I can't believe you don't have enough in the background.
Yeah, I know.
That's where you should start with that. Start with the BAFTA.
Thank you so much for being here. And Nick, nice for you to join us. Tell us what you do on the team.
I'm Nick, and I started off on the project as a 3D artist, doing a little bit of environment art, and then just kind of didn't leave after that. So I ended up getting involved with a lot of the lighting for the game, and then also when we started porting it to Switch, I took on the sort of the art side of the optimization for getting that onto Switch as well. So lighting optimization and a bit of 3D art as well is me.
Yeah, I love that. We've been hearing a lot of that where people are like, I just came on to help them with something and now I've been stuck here for 7 years.
Yeah, I think there's just always something to be kind of sticking your nose into, you know, there's yeah.
And then, and we're going to go into all of that. So I'm very excited.
You also jump in to do like one task, but then you end up doing like 6 different things, right?
Yeah.
That's indie dev for you.
Yeah. And we're going to break that all down during this stream. So it's going to be great. So tell us a little bit about Last Stop. What's the game about? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, cool. Last Stop is a cinematic story game. So it's centered around these 3 characters, John, Mina, and Donna. And the 3 stories are all quite different. So John's story is sort of goofball body swap story where he swaps bodies with his neighbor and he has to deal with the challenges that brings, being a single dad and not having much money, and actually the realities of like, how do you do your job when you're not actually going to be going to your job, you're going to be going to someone else's job. So there's that one, and then Domestic Affairs is the story with Mina, and she's a sort of washed up secret agent who in her prime was sort of like a James Bond figure, but gave up her role in her career to start a family, and now she's, as her child is getting older, she's craving to get back to what she does best. But there's a thorn in her side that's trying to prevent her from getting that job promotion. So it's sort of like a paranoid thriller in that sense. And then the last one, Stranger Danger, which is follows Donna, who is a teenage girl who is with a few friends, kind of just goofing around. One evening, decide to follow a man who one of her friends, called Vivek, thinks is some sort of weird guy worth following. So they do follow him, and they end up discovering that he may not be human, and inadvertently end up kidnapping him. So the story is around dealing with, like, I mean, it's just stupid kids. They should have really just left and called the police, but they didn't. And so they're stuck in the situation where they have to manage this weird guy who's in this swimming pool where they've kept him hostage. And and it's a weird, strange relationship forms between the hostage and Donna. And all 3 of those stories are set in a sort of same area of a fictional London. And we sort of flip between the 3 stories as you play the game. They're sort of separated into different chapters, and so you play chapters usually between sort of 15 minutes and 20 minutes of playtime. Once you finish one chapter, you then have to choose which of the other characters you want to role play for the next chapter. And once you've finished all the chapter 1s, then they all get unlocked again, and you can proceed to play the chapter 2s of any of the stories. So you get the choice of which order you do them in, but you can't just steamroll ahead in one chapter. It's kind of designed to sort of play them kind of all at once, or make sure you play one chapter, all the chapter 1s and all the chapter 2s, etc. So that's the sort of setup of the story. I guess that because it is a story game, its main gameplay that the player is doing is controlling the player, walking around the world, speaking with the characters. So we have a system where you have to choose the dialogue, and every time the character speaks, you choose a dialogue. And so we really wanted there to be sort of snappy back and forth. So there's quite frequent interaction where the dialogue lines are generally quite short, and there's often opportunity to choose one of 3 options to choose the direction of the conversation. That's the crux of it.
We have a handy slide if we want to go through
a slide. We have a slide that describes all the modes in the game, which might be just useful to sort of break it down into its constituent parts.
So it is a very narratively driven game, and it's a very cinematic game, right? So a big focus of the game is different directed camera types, right? And so you're going to walk us through that, right? What those different directed camera types are and how they relate to gameplay and your navigation throughout the world.
Yeah.
So let's jump to Nick's screen share, and we'll look at those slides. And Nick, maybe you can walk us through that.
Yeah. So I think it's not up. It's not up. There we go.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Can you? Yeah, that looks big enough.
Perfect.
So yeah, Lyndon's going to play through a little section that's kind of at the start of the game, but is sort of, I guess, emblematic of the rest of the game as well. So it'll kind of show you all the different types of things that you can get up to. And yeah, like just very briefly, we thought it was worth maybe introducing the 4 kind of rough elements that the whole game is made up of. So the walking sections. So all the cameras are Cinemachine cameras. So we're using Cinemachine a ton, like across the entire game, like in all sorts of different ways. So the walking around sections, we kind of refer to those as directed camera sections. So like Lyndon was saying, it's like a cinematic game, so we wanted a lot of control over the camera. And we'll cover this a little bit more after we've played through a bit, but we've got a few different techniques for having sort of standard cinematic camera moves, crane shots and all that kind of stuff. And then we approach those different types of camera moves in different ways. So sometimes walking around might influence the camera, or the camera might be tracking a player using Cinemachine's like custom sort of tools for doing that. Or we've got a few kind of specific things that we use as well. So, timelines, Cinemachine blends, or scrub timeline from player position, which is something we'll have a look at afterwards, where you can kind of decouple a camera move from a walk. And the other element, or one of the other sections that we're going to come across a lot, is our conversations. Again, we'll cover that a little bit more when we open up the editor and have a look at them. But again, they're Cinemachine cameras, and they'll either be sort of overlapping the directed camera bits, where you maybe have a dynamic conversations like a walk and talk. Yeah. But then there'll be other sections where they're locked off, and you'll have a more standard kind of, I guess, like an RPG kind of thing, where you're talking to over-the-shoulder cameras and that kind of thing. And we'll have a look at one of those. There are cutscenes where we have full control over the cameras, the lights, and all of that sort of stuff without any player input at all. They're all timeline based. And then we also have little sections which we refer to ourselves as interactions, which is not a particularly useful name for something, but like they're just sort of momentary gameplay sections. They're like little mini games, and sometimes not as much as what you would describe as a mini game, but little sort of bespoke setups. So, for example, using your travel card to get access to the train station, or brushing your teeth, or eating cereal, or lots of little bits and bobs like that. And I think we've got an example of most of these things as we're playing through. So it might be best to have a look.
I'm just wondering, were these elements devised very early at the beginning before jumping into building the game, or is this something that was figured out as the game was being built? Does it evolve over time?
Go on, Nick.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of these kind of were built out of necessity, and then the systems themselves were honed as different needs grew up. Like certainly the conversation system, bizarrely enough, I would have ended up having a little bit of input and sort of suggestions for that because I was using it a lot for the lighting. So we'll show you later on, like the conversation sort of prefabs, which would be used normally for setting up the cameras and the characters. I was using a lot. I had to interact with those a lot to set up the light. So I guess we needed a system in there, and then they kind of changed as we went along and kind of developed as we went. I would imagine.
Yeah, the directed cameras actually was something that evolved over the development cycle. It initially we had the concept that, okay, if we're going to set a game in London and we have quite a small team, how can we make sure we can build this? And so we had the not so smart idea of just building a sort of stage, so only sort of visible from one angle. And the directed cameras to begin with was just going to be, every time you go in that environment, the cameras will always show it from one perspective. So behind the camera will be absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so we get away with only building what we see. Right. And that was the thinking just purely from a practical point of view. And we thought that maybe that's all we needed. Of course, we didn't think, but as soon as we get to the sort of static conversations, which we knew from the beginning that we wanted conversations that felt like camera setups, but felt like TV and film. But suddenly you have a reverse shot and the camera just showing loads of missing geometry. So,
right.
So we're like, okay, that's no good. And so then we decided, okay, let's just build everything. Let's just somehow make that work. Built all the levels that we have. We built, fully 3D environments, and after we did that, we decided, because every time to begin with, the game was more of a open world exploration game in that you could walk between levels and it was up to you to find your way to the next destination, the waypoint. And every time you went into a level, there was always going to be the same camera. Kind of got tired of that. And so we thought, let's just put a orbit 3D camera in. And that was great for a while. And but actually the reason why we came back to directed cameras and directed cameras in a different way, like we ended up with directed cameras which were bespoke for every single scene, which the original intent was just directed cameras for the environment, one for the environment every time you go there. But the reason why we left the 3D orbit camera was that we discovered actually upon sort of making the vertical slice that actually walking around an environment and because the game is all just about story experience, walking and talking with characters and waiting to get to the next destination, and then the story continues and you speak with the characters in like this sort of static conversation setup. We found that there were lots of there's lots of dead time between basically when you weren't doing something, walking, you're just walking to the next location. And we felt actually this is kind of ruining the pace of the story. And it's kind of weird to really, like Virginia, the game we did before, was the exact opposite of that. It cut out all of the all that stuff. We had the intention of like, let's just cut out all the sort of noise that you get in games where you have to go from one location to the next. If you just all you're caring about is the story, well, in like a TV or film, you just cut to that moment. So it's kind of funny that we didn't do. We had to relearn what we learned on Virginia, but we came back round to that way of thinking about the game, and it just unlocked so much potential possibility that actually, I mean, for one, like the cameras allowed to do specific storytelling, like visual storytelling tricks. I mean, like if the camera is far away from the character, that might sort of suggest some distance between. There's two characters walking and they're far away, it suggests some sort of distance between them. Or you can have like cool tracking shots for sort of pace to the music. So we were kind of keen to use, once we fully embraced it, keen to use the cinematography as a tool to help with storytelling. And also strangely, and this is not something we planned, but having we actually have quite a lot of environment art in the end. But to begin with, by not having that much environment art, by shooting we would revisit the same environments a lot of time, but we were shooting it in ways in which you might not recognize, but this is the same environment. And so it was sort of making the world feel bigger. And this is sort of typical of, I suppose, films that are shot on backlots and things like this. You might shoot it in different ways. I mean, Blade Runner being a famous example. The whole thing is just a short little street, but it feels like an entire city, the way that creative ways that they shot it. So I guess we sort of took a leaf out of that book as well. And that was, kind of like a happy accident, I suppose.
Did you ever... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, just like, it's funny that we kind of went through that phase of doing the orbit camera, which I kind of had blocked out of my memory. It was kind of like a moment where we had all of the environments as we wanted them. They were all being shot from specific angles. And then we were happy with that. And then we introduced the orbit camera. And suddenly we had to go back to all of those environments and find all of the missing spaces, all of the, the views down the back street that you wouldn't have seen before, and then build those all out. Which then we went back to the directed cameras in a way that could have been wasted, because obviously you wouldn't necessarily have needed all of those extra environments or all that extra geometry. But I think then that gave Lyndon the freedom when he was directing the cameras and going around and making shots. It did feel more like you were shooting a film because you could get coverage. You weren't limited by the environment that was straight in front of you, that you were kind of narrowly well, that's all I've got. Suddenly there were background details that we had to add in afterwards to fill in the background, and you could shoot with a bit more freedom. So I guess it was a bit of a circuitous route, but yeah, it worked out well in the end, I suppose.
There's even some examples of Nick, you did some of the 3D art in the environment, but someone else, Stevie Brown, did a lot as well, and he would make things in the environment that was just designed to be just background stuff. So an example, he made an arcade machine, and he just had it there, but because it was there, we kind of incorporated it into the story. And so there's a scene later on in the game where one of the characters is just playing the arcade machine. Okay. And so it sort of, that wasn't something that was written, it just someone, and I don't think Stevie put it in there for intention for it to be used. It did get used because it was there. And so it was like, we had a set to work with, and we were kind of trying to squeeze as much as we could out of the sets that we had.
I love that. That's kind of like improv, right? And you're kind of making it feel like they're living in that actual world. They're interacting with the environment. It's not just like a set that's all around them. That's wonderful. I actually have a million questions, but I would love for the audience to get a visual idea of what we're talking about. So let's jump into that section of the game, and we can keep talking about it while actually looking at the game. So we'll jump to Lyndon's screen share now. I guess we're playing the introduction, for chapter 1.
Yeah. So this is in the Unity editor. So John has just. This is basically a normal day for John. He's taken his daughter to school. I guess the inciting incident of the story hasn't happened yet. So this is really just setting up the world, the mood, what he's like.
Super genius.
So in this section here, we can just see an example of what we call dynamic dialogues, which are essentially small.
Why don't you and Jack be friends?
I have full control of the character, and she's just following me. And you see how quickly it is that I get to make a decision on dialogue, and
but she's a work friend. Cooler friend.
Some of these
and her stupid hair.
Some of these decisions will be remembered later on. So I might say,
we should really patent that quality oil backpack technology as well with the googly eyes.
We try and get that in every single screenshot that we have. We try and get that.
The most popular prop.
Yeah, I love it. Priorities.
Yeah, it should be variable state merch.
Oh, guys!
I actually have googly eyes on my own backpack.
Yeah.
I'm not a child, I swear.
Chat, let us know if you want googly eyes merch for last stop.
I'll shoot them with a machine gun.
So we're coming up to
oh my.
a static dialogue here. So this has all been just walking and talking, but now
See you later then, nuisance.
we go into a more sort of traditional camera setup. Same sort of rules apply in terms of the dialogue.
Gross. Bye, Dad.
Then animation moments, which are actually cutscenes, but you wouldn't really know to watch it. The whole idea is it's also supposed to feel like one piece, switching between the modes. So yeah, this is the credits sequence, I suppose. John is walking to work, and
these are the cameras we can have a quick look at afterwards. So they all work in slightly different ways.
Yeah. So these cameras are kind of, I'm not controlling the camera at all. It's all kind of done automatically.
I guess it's also worth mentioning that a lot of work went into getting these environments and levels loading super quick.
Yeah.
Like if you notice there's a cut between primary school environment and this is the high street environment. And they're both pretty hefty in terms of like scene size. They're both pretty big environments, but all of the environments for a chapter are loaded at the beginning, and that we kind of swap in between those two. And that's those kind of instant cuts, I guess, were completely essential for what the style of the game had to be, because if you had a loading screen every time there was an edit point, then it wouldn't really work. The rhythm would be kind of knackered. So I guess we can look a little bit at that stuff too.
Yeah, this is just like a short little mini game. You get to tap on the tube. There we are.
Experience what it's like trying to get on the tube.
So what is it like getting on the London Tube? Seamless process?
I didn't find it particularly seamless when I went over. There was usually about 20 very angry people standing behind me as I tried to batter my wallet on the entrance gate.
Potato hater and Chad's like, great, he still had money on his pass.
Yeah, oh my.
Somebody in chat, Lickbean asked in chat if this was done with Cinemachines and AI, and actually there's Cinemachines and a bunch of custom tools that we're gonna dig deep into, so stick around.
So actually that was kind of all I was going to show for us, just to not get too far ahead. So maybe we could jump into the next screen.
So we'll jump to next screen and we'll look at we're gonna look at Cinemachine and Timeline and look at basically how a cutscene is put together, with the animations, the audio, and with all of that. So we're gonna look at that now. But I had a question. So when building the city that we just saw, like, are those streets actual streets that you've taken photographs of, or were they kind of imagined, or like, is this a real, like, is that a real street?
I think it's worth pointing out, like, Stevie did the vast majority of the environment art. So when I said I came onto the project, that my role initially was sort of an extra pair of hands for Stevie to do, a few other bits of the environment as well. And a lot of the time, what we would do is go on Street View. So the environments, I guess, Stevie in London? I'm not sure. You guys based it on places you sort of knew, right, when you were writing. So you a lot of you would have.
We didn't want to make the London BC a sort of like travel brush. We wanted it to be more like the sort of not suburbs, but not like the centre of London, but places where people actually live and can afford to live. And so a lot of the reference images are places where people lived. So, for instance, Donna's flat in Stranger Danger.
We can have a look at that. Yeah. Sorry, I think
is where Stevie.
I think that might be your screen there, Lyndon. Is it possibly?
Yeah, let's switch over to Nick's screen.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
No, not at all. Thanks.
I can just have this in the background. But yeah, so there'd be real places, and a lot of the reference would be Street View. So we'd go to those places and wander around, kind of, and then build them up from there, and then.
But it's important to note that we weren't trying to make a realistic interpretation of London. So we did make changes where, like, we had design requirements that might mean that we needed a road that wasn't where there wasn't a road, or sometimes we're matching up familiar places and putting them together in a way that makes it not look like a real place in London, but that still has the feel of a somewhere in London. Like all the tube stations are made up, but the one that we just looked at was based on I think it's South Kensington, the one that's close to the museums. But it doesn't necessarily completely look like that in real life. But there's something to. I mean, it's just really useful to live in London and also get those photographs that we. I had a day field recording where I just went round with a microphone and was recording loads of tubes going past.
Oh, nice.
I love that.
Actually, couldn't find any library audio for that, so I had to go out and do that.
Amazing.
That's quite fun.
Did you have a big badger on a stick?
I had,
funny.
Yeah, it was not a massive badger.
That's what sound recorded Scotland, though, isn't it? Or did I make that up?
You could be right. I don't know. I'm not.
I thought they referred to them as badger sticks.
Yeah, well, they look like badges.
I like that.
That's what we're calling them now. But there's so many YouTubers and vloggers that just carry on full like red cameras and stuff like that. So it's not even weird.
No.
So I've got there we are. Right. I've got the primary school environment. So that was the one that we just walked through. So John leaving Molly off the school. And then there's that little section that we were talking about, which sort of forms the credits, where John walks down the road, turns the corner, the title card comes up. And we've got 3 different types of directed camera for that one section. And they kind of helpfully start simple and go to the more kind of involved one. So the first one, if you imagine, I guess, in the script, this object will start off, and then when we get to this section, there'll be a trigger box or something else that causes it to come on, and then this Cinemachine camera takes priority over the rest. So that's kind of, I think I'm right in saying that's kind of how they always work.
Yeah.
There's one single camera that we use, and then we use the virtual camera system that Cinemachine has to switch positions. So rather than animating the camera with keyframes or whatever, we use those V-cams to cut between them and do it that way.
Yes, so there's only ever one camera that's persistent throughout the whole game, and we use virtual cameras, or VCam, for actually customizing, doing all the camera work. Maybe it's worth mentioning as well that the way in which we're transitioning between scenes is pretty much always just you walk into a trigger box and then it cuts.
Okay.
But then also we time it to we can time it to if you finish a dialogue when you're walking and talking, rather than just have the player continue walk for no reason. We can cut then. So there's kind of multiple options there.
Yeah, I noticed earlier when you were speaking, when the girl was speaking to her father, as soon as you answered the question, the camera cut.
Yeah.
It's just at that moment.
To try and sort of keep the pacing, keep the story moving. I mean, there is an exception with John walking on his own to the tube station. Is kind of, that was because it's a credits moment. We thought it was acceptable to have just some music and the character walking on his own. But otherwise, we're trying to sort of keep the story ticking over, sort of editing it, if you like. By using
for those who aren't aware, earlier when you were talking about one camera and a bunch of virtual cameras, so the way Cinemachine works is you have just there's physically one camera in the editor, and it's just essentially transforming or teleporting to the locations of the different virtual cameras. And those virtual cameras are essentially transform objects or objects with transform information and other kinds of information about the lens and the type of camera.
Yeah, they work really well because they do that job really well. But then you can also add extra bits to them, if you know what I mean. So they they kind of act just like little, I don't know how you would describe them, but they kind of cover all of the things you really want to cover when you're using a camera without having to manually set all of that stuff up and keyframe it and animate it and all that. It kind of hits all those points that you want. So you can set a depth of field components on them. You can do, you can set your field of view and you can do animation on that, as well as the transition. So with the next one, we can show you like a blend between two VCams as well, which is like a Cinemachine built-in thing. But this first one, so if you can remember, the conversation finishes and then the player walks down this road, and it's literally just a timeline with those keyframes set on the VCam, and that's it. So the timeline itself is set to play on awake, and that particular VCam is active underneath the parent, which is inactive. So as soon as that comes on in gameplay, that timeline starts, right? So it doesn't matter what you do with the player, movement, anything like that, that animation just plays, and that's the most basic kind of way of putting a camera move into that shot. Like it plays regardless.
And the reason why we get away with doing that is because the character's starting position. In fact, Nick, do you have maybe you could drag in?
Yeah, I'm sure we can find
John
somewhere
into the John spawn point, just to sort of show where he starts. It would be a problem if the end of that shot actually clipped out the. You can see that he's always visible. So you can move the camera and it doesn't actually prohibit you from, like, if someone wasn't walking forward and just decided to stay there, and what would happen is the camera would just go to there and then you just wait until you walk forward. We have other moments where we need the camera to do more than that, and leave the original character spawn point, and for that we use other methods to make sure that the camera is controlled by character movement, which I'm sure Nick will move on to.
So we got a timeline which I think is pretty straightforward, and then Cinemachine also has blend lists set up, and they take two, but do they take as many as you want? Yeah, they do. So you can add as many as you kind of want.
Yeah, and I think that, to be honest, I think the previous camera could have been done maybe in a blend list. I'm not sure why it's just quicker to use a blend list and set up a new timeline asset, and then have to have that timeline playing awake and all this stuff. Blend list is kind of, it's out of the box, works. The only issue with it is sometimes the preview.
I think the preview's working all right. We've got that going. Sometimes you need to be you kind of need to sneak up on it and make sure that specific camera is soloed before you do anything. Is that movement showing up okay?
Yeah,
that's great.
So you can kind of, I guess the benefit of one of these, as well as kind of ease of setup, the benefit of this way over the timeline way is that it's slightly easier to edit afterwards. Like, as in, if you for example didn't like the look of, I don't know, this car or something that was coming into shot, rather than having to edit any keyframes, you just move the last camera, right? You just frame up your next shot and right. That's it, sorted. Or if you suddenly decide that when you're playing this, oh, actually I want to see more of the background, I want to see more of the playground in the background, you kind of come in here and shift this second camera up a little bit.
Yeah, it's just to explain, it is just going between two cameras, just blending between. So change your position here, yeah.
So it's super easy to kind of frame your shot up with two cameras or as many cameras as you want, and then let Cinemachine do the blend between it. And then also, I guess you've got curves to do eases, and you can change all this stuff so you can have it happening instantly or super quick and all that kind of jazz. And that's easy to access.
Sometimes that's really useful as well if you're going from a moving camera.
Oh yeah.
You might want the camera to be not starting from a curve. You want it to start from like a linear, so it, like, the movement is kind of when you do the cut, the movement seems fluid.
Yeah, which is kind of the opposite of what you always imagine. You always imagine an ease in is going to look much smoother than than a linear. But if you start slow, then the camera's not moving at all effectively for the first few frames. Isn't that kind of the deal? So if your camera's moving along and then you cut to the next one and it's got no motion on it, then it feels more like a harsh transition to that next guy that's static effectively at the start of that curve, which is flat. So that's Cinemachine's built-in.
So at what stage are you setting up these cameras? Do you like set them up right away, or do you wait till all the dialogue is in there, all the conversations are in there, then all the scenes are done, and then start directing everything in between?
I think that we redid a lot of these when we did a second pass on. I guess the way that we built these levels was that we did like a first pass, and that might include the dialogue, but maybe not the actual VO. And so then we do the VO, and then maybe there's lines changed there, or maybe we go back and re-record the VO at some point. But in that second pass, we're including like the environment art might be, now we got the shots, the environment art might be worked up on in key areas where the camera gets close. And then we might get feedback that the cameras are making it difficult to know where to go. In fact, that's another, I suppose, reason for doing the directed cameras was we didn't want to have waypoints really on the screen telling you where to go. We kind of wanted it to feel obvious where you were supposed to go. So the cameras kind of help with that. Like here, for instance, the camera's rising up, which hopefully draws your attention to the background and makes you walk down there. I mean, we have been quite heavy-handed with some of the collision as well, because we don't allow you to walk onto that road, I think, because some roads have cars on them.
And you shouldn't walk on roads with cars.
You don't want to get hit by a car.
We did have just a slight digression, we did have a whole cast
with AI
at one point, but it's so expensive, and it wasn't really what the game, it was like a small thing to add to the game that was taking up so many resources, but we decided well, why don't we just say, well, these characters aren't idiots. They're not going to walk into the road. There's a car there. We just won't let them walk on the roads. So yeah, sorry, Nick, I sort of interrupted your flow.
No, you're all right. No, absolutely. So this is the more involved, I guess, way of having a camera move change depending on whereabouts your player is in the scene. There are ways of setting up something in Cinemachine where you track the player, which we do in a bunch of places as well. But in this instance, our programmer, Ed, I think I'm right in saying, basically almost reverse engineered one of the elements that Cinemachine uses for moving its cameras along. So this sort of train track that you can see in the scene here is a smooth, what's it called? A Cinemachine smooth path. But rather than having anything moving along that path, what the script on the camera is doing is testing the position of the player per point along that path. So it takes the nearest point to the player and it uses that information to scrub a timeline. So if this is the timeline, I think that's plugged in. No, it's not. This is the timeline that's plugged in. So this is the timeline for that camera move.
Right.
But the position along that timeline. So if John's at this point, so the nearest point on that track is the first point, 0. So the timeline is at 0. And then as you walk through that path, it tests where you are in relation to it. And the further along the path you get, the further along the timeline you get. Which means you can sort of, it works in a load of different ways that the tracking camera wouldn't work. So you sort of decouple the character movement from the movement of the camera. So in this case, we wanted a crane shot. It's kind of a standard title screen shot. Mm-hmm. And if this camera was tracking John like that, it would be following him along. So in this way, you can almost have them sort of opposing each other. So the camera moves up as John walks along, but you can do a bunch of other different things. So like, it's quite easy to change. That's a famous last words. It's usually quite easy to kind of edit, but we'll see how we get on here. But like, if we take this path and make it much smaller,
right? And so you're changing the 0 to 1 on the path there, right?
These we don't even need to worry about that. So the way the script works, it takes that path and it sorts all of that stuff out for you. So as long as you kind of just work out, that's exactly what it is doing though. Yeah, you're right.
And then 0 to 1 is projected onto the timeline.
Yeah.
But then the movement is decoupled, so you have that artistic license to do what you want.
So you can see here we get to the top of that. I mean, obviously it doesn't work because, the camera move is designed to work for when John's further down the street. But you can see now that the timeline gets to the end much quicker.
Yeah, you have sort of... Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so then you can also change the camera as well. So you could keep the path the same. So that was the way it was to begin with. But then go to the end of your timeline.
I would love if you could show the timeline and the scene view at the same time so we could see the moving along the track and the timeline. Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, can you do that?
Since those two are linked up together.
So... there we go.
Yeah, there we go.
I was saying it's kind of interesting there that it doesn't need to be that accurate looking at it. Like the track really cuts that corner.
There's definitely some blending going on in the script that Ed made to kind of account for that. Because like the further we get away from the path, the more I suppose digital it feels. That you get like it jumps between spots on the in the timeline, because it's, I suppose there's only so many points on that path that it can reference, but it's kind of sampling. So there is some blending, smoothing that is adjustable. Which, to be honest, when I'm playing with them, does feel a bit like tuning numbers that I've got no idea what they're doing. there's kind of a bit of just massaging until it feels right. But it is cool that you can. I would do exactly like this. So have it in game, play it in game with control in one hand, and then the mouse in the other hand, and just changing the values until it kind of feels right.
Oh wow.
So the iteration time is actually it would be a nightmare if you couldn't do that live. Basically, if you had to do that.
So that's your workflow. So you basically just keep setting this up, keep walking back and forth until it's just the way you like it.
And especially timeline, because it actually any changes you make when you're in play mode, it saves. It becomes quite easy to. I mean, it's probably a good thing that generally in Unity, when you make a change in play mode, it sort of reverts afterwards, because you can make lots of mistakes. But it'd be difficult to, if you had to make those changes and then they got lost. Sometimes there's so many little, like, tiny little details you're changing on the curve that you kind of want to keep that. And so it's really useful that timeline, it saves it. Any changes that are made in play mode.
I have no idea what camera move I'm doing here. I'm just doing like a crash zoom or something. I'm just I've ruined the game. And
just
a lot of people in chat are like trying to promote a green play mode tint.
Sorry?
Rather than red.
A lot of people in chat are shocked by your red play mode tint and are pushing for they're like green.
The number of times I've I've sat and lit a whole scene and then realized that the play button was pushed, and
so this was punishment,
the cursing and the pulling out of hair. I thought red was kind of would encourage me to pay more attention.
That's fair.
Yeah. It's red for stop.
Exactly.
Green for go. If my editor was green, I'd be thinking,
it's all
good to
good.
make edits. So you can see. I mean, artistically, I've expressed myself here with this kind of hideous crash. But you can kind of imagine that whatever you wanted the camera to be doing. So if you think sort of the Cinemachine blends are going to be, well, they're going to be blends, right? So the most you're going to be able to get out of that are multiple camera positions. You can get there, you can get a lot, and obviously, because the game is influenced by cinema and cinematography, you probably aren't going to want the camera zipping all over the place like in a game. But if you do need more control and you do need it to do something that's a little bit more bespoke, then Timeline's great because you can have I mean, this is still quite a simple camera move, but you can imagine you could have a whole elaborate sort of thing going on here, and set the camera doing all sorts of different things, and you could be animating the focal length and the depth of field and everything else. If you really wanted to, you could go to time, and then still sort of feel safe in the knowledge that the player is only going to see that camera move as they walk within the kind of confines that you've set for them, which I guess is sort of the important step in combining directed cinematography with player input, because otherwise the player has control over the camera or you have entire control over the camera, whereas this sort of feels like at least a nice kind of melding of the two of those. You still feel like you're involved as a player, but,
right?
But Lyndon can decide where the camera goes to kind of to get across the message that you want.
You do have the freedom to go back and then
absolutely
back to the position it was in.
And that's the other thing. So these, if you go back to the start of the screen, you're not going to get cut off if the camera move is particularly extreme or whatever, which would happen in the timeline if it was set up the same way.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are the three types of directed cameras that are used everywhere.
Thank you. That was very clearly illustrated.
It's worth sort of mentioning about what the impact having these directed cameras has on the player controller, because we want to cut between scenes, cut between time, cut between perspectives. So a character might leave a scene screen left, and then we might jump to the character walking south from screen north. And because we're using the whole game has been, or the whole chapter has been loaded into memory before we start, so that there's no loading screen, so everything's instant cuts. You're holding the left stick and you're walking screen left, and you cut to another screen and you're suddenly you're at the top of the screen. Well, it might be that the camera relative position, the forward position, doesn't make any sense anymore. And so the character just turns around and walks the other way. And so there's a couple of solutions to that. One being point to click, which we kind of didn't want to do because we wanted the player to feel like they were always in control rather than clicking and waiting. That's not like a knock on point to click games. I love point to click games. We kind of wanted to give the feeling that you were walking and then pressing the face buttons to talk, like you do in something like Oxenfree or something like that. And the other way around that is time controls, which I don't think I've never really been a fan of. So we attempted another method, which I think other games have done. This is definitely not we haven't solved some problem that other games haven't encountered before, but we had the ability in script to freeze the direction of the player. So if you were holding down the left stick and you went to the next screen, it would, as long as you're still holding the controller, it will just go in the forward position.
Yeah.
And so you would have, you kind of, all your control would just be you're directing character forward. We then allow player control back by either the player let go of a stick and suddenly it resets and you can now press the left stick to go in the correct direction, or by curving the stick round to match the direction the player is actually walking in. And there'd be like degrees of, like on a pie chart, it might be sort of 20 degrees either side or 30 degrees. I can't remember the exact the exact degrees that we tune. but that was kind of, once we did that, I mean, I think it'll probably take, it won't be, take maybe players, it'll be interesting to see how, we did play testing, people seem to be okay with it, but be interested to see how people get on with it, because it's, I think maybe the first couple of times you have to work out what's going on.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can show, I mean, maybe I can just, is there any point me showing, I've got the thing loaded up here, if it's worth me sharing screen just to sort of, to demonstrate.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting camera, like I don't want to say issue, but like a situation that comes up in that's come up in many games in the past, right? The earliest one I remember is maybe Resident Evil 1, right? Where the camera would jump from room to room, and then you now have to figure out the new controls perspective for the room you're in. But I think the remakes then fix that with a similar system to what you're talking about. So yeah,
we were trying to think of games actually we could use as an example. Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube maybe would have been
the remake on Steam, the latest one, Biohazard.
Right,
you could check that out. Yeah,
right.
Am I right in thinking the original had tank controls, didn't it?
Yeah,
the original Resident Evil. Yeah, so it was like Grim Fandango. But,
yes, exactly.
Which solves the problem, but still makes it quite difficult to control, I think.
I think like Hassan and I we like huge point and click fans, and we talk about Grim Fandango so often. It's crazy how often we've talked about Grim Fandango this year.
So it shouldn't be referenced this much on our Spotlight stream.
You guys are sponsored.
But it's exactly what we point out is the camera system. It's like, I think I remember telling him I missed an entire section of the puzzles because the camera was set up in a way that I never realized I was supposed to even go in that area. So it's a very crucial aspect of the game.
That's interesting when you think about point and click adventures, because normally the artist would have had complete control over what you were looking at. Like, as in, it would have been a hand painted background or whatever. But then I guess Grim Fandango was a bit of a departure with the 3D cameras and everything else. Then they changed it again, didn't they? They did the same thing as Resident Evil. They re-released with different cameras and no tank controls. And
yeah, exactly. I don't know if it made it better, but I still love, it's still one of those great games, like ahead of its time, and they were really trying really cool different things, but like to see that from what was like over 20 something years ago to now is like, wow, this feels like this feels what I think they were trying to accomplish, right? This really cinematic quality.
And to see all of these old games that were trying these cinematic things get remastered, I think is really useful to study, because then you're seeing how these other teams tackled these problems, because they weren't thinking about those issues before maybe, but now they're, player expectations have changed. We want games to feel a lot smoother, a lot less frustrating. So a lot of these problems have already been tackled by other developers. So whenever you're approaching a problem, you can, use references, look at what other teams are doing, especially these teams that are remaking their own games for a modern audience, right? Yeah.
I
guess
absolutely.
Full Throttle would be the other sort of. Although no 3D cameras in it.
That's 3D. That's more 2D.
One of the references, I think Metal Gear Solid 1, some sections in that where you
that changed a lot. Yeah,
that did the sort of system that we ended up with. Probably in a more sophisticated way for me today. But
you kind of mentioned at the beginning, like really briefly, but somebody asked in chat, like to avoid latency issues. You mentioned that you preload some stuff, but is everything preloaded in the level before you transition?
Yeah. Is there an easy way to show that? I wonder. It's quite shocking. It's quite shocking. The frustrating thing is if I show you in Bootstrap and go to load, the loading takes quite a long time, which I feel does such a disservice to the work that Ed did, because in a build it loads like super fast. I can show you roughly. Actually, Lyndon, what bit were you going to show for?
No, but I'm not sure on this. I'm not sure necessarily this is. I think people get it. I was just going to demonstrate that whole thing.
I'm just thinking I could load it just as an example of what loads up.
Yeah, I think it's worth. Anyway. I think it's worth it because we will talk about it later about like you actually like this is ported to like several platforms, and what's really impressive is how performant it is on all of them, and a lot of the performance considerations you had for this game.
So I guess if you look in this area, can you see my cursor? Is my cursor there?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can see what's loading.
we should say that every single scene isn't every single Unity scene you're seeing there isn't a unique environment. We have lots of additive layers, but maybe we can talk about.
Oh yeah, I can show you that when I'm talking about the lights, possibly. Yeah.
And like there's inside there's lots of gameplay specific layers for chapters that we don't need to load in. When it's an environment might have gameplay information for like Domestic Affairs Chapter 4 or Stranger Danger Chapter 3. Like that doesn't get loaded in for only the stuff relevant to the chapter you're playing gets loaded in.
So when you're setting up a chapter script, there's like a little section at the start where you add all of those environments that you're going to use in, isn't there? It kind of
it's just like a list of environments, a list of characters you're going to be using, a list of I think what else? List of conversations. So it's kind of when you load into a chapter, there's no surprises. They know exactly what's in there, so it doesn't have to load anything. So in fact, if you tried to load anything that wasn't in there, it would cause a bug. You wouldn't try and load it.
So you're just going to have to take my word for it that is not how long it takes to load in a build. It's a shame that I can't show you it because it's extremely impressive. Like how when you look at the number of scenes that are kind of going in there, it happens pretty much instantly. I guess depending on what your hard drive is. But yeah, so each every level we kind of refer to them as levels. Actually, I might just open up the level tool. And as Lyndon was saying, they're effectively a collection of additive scenes, and that's usually split by environment. So, for example, the one we were just looking at is called Primary School Exterior. And you can see for that one, we've got main, where the environment lives. We've got lighting, which has a bunch of stuff in it, foliage, trees, props, audio, crowds, gameplay for chapter 1 of Paper Dolls is in there, and one of the lighting scenes. So that's all of the scenes that you're going to be accessing for that chapter are all preloaded.
Also, all the cutscenes as well. So a cutscene will have its own Unity scene, so that it can be worked on independent of what other people are doing. So, but they will also get loaded in.
I guess it also helps to just organize things, right?
For like version control, it was useful that all the gameplay stuff was on a separate Unity scene to all the environment art, all the lighting and the separate, all the audio, etc. So that minimizing the conflicts.
Did I show the level tool there? No, I didn't. I just had it on. So if you look at
are you going to be able to use this while you're in play mode?
I was just going to show so that's the scriptable object that's telling the primary school level what scenes are involved in that level, if that makes sense.
Rather than having to sort of manually find all these things, all these constituent parts and load them all together, just made a tool that you press one button and it loads them all in.
Loads them in. I think it's kind of peeking off the side of the screen, is it? That's an interesting insight into changes in name. Every single environment has at least 2 names.
Yeah.
The one that it started off as, and then the one that it ended up getting referred to.
I see.
And the same with the characters as well. So
you find that when you're in team meetings, you're always referring to the same thing in different ways. And
absolutely.
I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. We've got characters' names that have changed, but for sort of 3 years, but the environment's still named after them.
I think anybody who worked, certainly the animators, are never going to involve themselves with a body swap story ever again. Because
just from file naming.
Well, that's it.
Is it John or is it Jack?
Yeah,
it's actually a good question because I don't know who.
I've got John, but do you
soul that's John, or is it the soul?
Exactly. Do you refer to their consciousness whenever you're animating that character, or are you looking for Jack's body so you can animate Jack, or is it John in Jack or John as Jack? It's just you end up getting so confused.
Calling actors as well with the different names is really difficult as well because you get confused. Is this John's line or Jack's line?
Just a reminder to chat, there's a body swap part in this game where two characters are inside each other's bodies, so referring to them becomes confusing.
Yeah.
Does that kind of show what I think the last question was about loading scenes on startup? So that's everything that gets loaded at the start of a chapter. So the game's split up into chapters per story, and those are all those are actually all the additive scenes that are going to be used in that entire chapter.
And it's probably worth mentioning, this is maybe stepping on some optimization chat we're going to have later, but just since we've got that now, like we kind of got lucky with, well, I say lucky, there was definitely like optimization that went in to make sure that all this fit in memory on the lowest system, which was Switch, which I think has like 2 gigs RAM. 4 gigs.
Uh-oh. We need a fact checker.
Yeah, someone fact check that. But like, it was never really that crazy where we couldn't. I mean, it was definitely crashing to begin with. It was like over, but we were able, without having to compromise too much or compromise really at all on the creative vision. We managed to get it all on Switch, and some of that, like, a lot of that, definitely is Nick, down to you and Ed. But I think some of it was down to a little bit of like, in fact, we did one of the last chapters did push it over the edge, and so we had to have we had to split the chapter into like the last chapter, which incorporates all 3 stories together, so it's sort of separate it doesn't break the like it's a special chapter in a way because it's just the last one. We split that into 2 just because there's no way of fitting it all onto the Switch. But that was the only case where that was an issue, and it happened at a moment which made sense. So it didn't feel like very suddenly right in the middle of a conversation there was a black screen and a load. It happened after a moment that you probably want a fade to black anyway. So
oh yeah, that's really clever actually. We can talk more about that, about porting to Switch. I think it's really interesting, and then your choices there. It's kind of funny because we've had several people on stream so far talking about porting to different platforms, why they did it themselves, why they didn't, the struggles with it. And then I think for you, it was actually a pretty good experience. But before we get to that, I would love to go back to Lyndon's screen because we can talk about the dialogue system. I mean, it's a narrative game. It's it's a huge part of the game. So would love to see how you built that out.
Yeah, cool. What I'm going to do is show you the dialogue first. So I'm just going to show a conversation. I mean, we've seen some already, but just to recap what we're talking about when we're talking about like the conversation system. And actually handling, I can also show off our dev tools. But everything here on the right-hand side won't be visible in the this for us. So everything that's a static dialogue can be put into a list. So these are all the conversations in the game. I'll go quickly, not to really spoil this. Well, mate. So I'm going to go to this one. I'm just going to unmute audio.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, we can hear you.
We're gonna go to a break after this section anyway, and so we'll get that.
Pull Nick back in.
We'll pull you back in. Yeah.
So this is just a section in the domestic affairs story where we're just meeting Mina's father for the first time. That's really all you need to know about it. He's a bit grouchy and doesn't really approve of what Mina does. So hence some of this weird dialogue he's getting.
How's life inside the military-industrial complex? Blown up any babies with your death robots this week?
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
Yeah. That escalated quickly.
All I see in the news these days is robots. Robots killing people, robots taking jobs, robots having sex with people. You know, in my day, we'd have balloted if someone tried to give a job to a bloody robot. Strong industrial action is what we need.
Did you get your test results back from Dr. Lund?
That's another thing that's gone to the dogs. The state of the health service in this country.
If all we're gonna do is start this up again, why don't I just leave you to it?
It's a mystery to me why you bother coming at all.
I didn't mean it, Dad. Come on, let's go see the pigeons.
Well, don't dawdle. Lead on.
There we are. Cool. So
You weren't joking about that conversation.
he's quite salty, salty man. So I suppose I just wanted to show that just because that incorporates a few different things that we wanted to try and achieve, I suppose. So from the outset, initially, I guess almost from day one, we wanted a conversation system that kind of appeared similar to what you would get in a film. So having different camera setups and different sorts of animation poses and things like that. And we started by thinking, well, what's the way in which we can make this process as automated as possible? So we made decisions early on, such as we don't want to be needing to control the editing. So we just make some rules, which is that every time a character speaks, their camera is live. And then when we cut to another character, their camera is live. And every time someone is speaking, if there's a head look system, so that character will look at the person who's speaking. And it's probably more obvious if you were to see it where there's a conversation set up with more than two people. But all these things can be overridden and tuned, but just from out of the box, that's what you get. And so we don't have to spend a lot of time hooking all that up so it before you can get something that's watchable. And so setting up we knew that we were going to have a lot of conversations in this game, and we wanted to be able to set up these conversations quickly. And so we created prefabs which had character positions for a very basic setup. So two, and they would be labeled. For instance, I can so if I can. You can show my screen again if you like.
Yeah, we can go back to Lyndon's screen, take a look at the dialogue system. And maybe Nick will be back. Yay!
Yeah. So we have lots of different prefabs here. I've just
no, that's my screen.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Oops, sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, we have these different. This isn't all of them. I'll show this in a better way later. But there are these different prefab setups which give you a bunch of stuff to begin with for free. So I'll just go to a scene and show you something.
Are you looking for the Mina one?
No, I was just going to. I will look at that. I will dissect that particular conversation in a moment. But I was just going to just show how quickly you can just get one set up. So let me enable this camera. This is off as default because it gets loaded at runtime, but it's all actually working. Set lighting. So just create a blank object. Static targets. These are all things that we built. Just, I'm not entirely sure how this works, but I know that when you initialize this, you get a list of prefabs which we made, and lots of and the one that you'd often use is just the two characters all standing, and it just places it in a weird place. I'll move it in a second. Where was it? Here it is. So there's no conversation active yet, so I will choose a conversation. One here.
I guess this would be true if you were setting up for a film as well, right? Because then if you knew you were doing just a dialogue between two people, most people there are going to know roughly how that's going to be set up. So you can get the lights into vaguely the right position. The cameras are going to be over the shoulder, back and forth. And
well, this is the beauty of working in 3D is that you can do stuff like this and then just move it around, and it saves the. I mean, it's obvious to say that, but obviously, you're working on a film. Every time you want to do exactly the same setup, you just have to redo everything. Whereas here, like, okay, so two-person setup. What I've done there, I just selected a conversation that's in the game. This is the start branch path. So I'll just load up that conversation just to show you what that means. Mina meets Felix. So if we ignore this for now, that's a conversation that plays from a cutscene, but it's looking for this conversation and that branch. We go straight to here. I'll talk in more detail about this dialogue tool shortly, but just to sort of explain where we're actually inputting information. And so that start branch is the conversation. I would unpack this because I don't actually want to save a prefab. I'm just using it as a template, I suppose. Actually, interestingly, notice that those characters are appearing and disappearing. That's because they're not actually in the scene. And I don't know how this is working, but I know that these are
magic. It's magic.
Yeah, well, it's magic to me. They are, I guess, previews of these character assets. So they don't actually live in the scene. So when you go off them, they're only visible when that's highlighted. So we do something like this. I usually have two inspectors open so I can do lock the inspector, and then if they stay there. And so, like, I would probably rename this. I know that's Mina's position, and I know that's Felix's position. The reason I know that is because, well, the main character typically, or it always, has the ID of 1, and it's represented here. So Mina 1 next to, and that is where it's pulling this character data from. So it's looking at what's on this spot, Mina Pos, ID 1. Look at that in this character. I guess it's a scriptable object. There is the information about that character. So there is prefab, and then you got the different outfits that they could have. So and the different names you could attach to it. So you generally just set that up once, and then you're good. But that's how that's that.
I was just going to say, it might be worth mentioning that those don't just get used in the conversations either. Like, so those characters kind of refer to the information with those specific named characters, like their outfits and their. So when we're referencing them in a cutscene or whatever, then you can pick different outfits after the fact. And you can set those outfits in script, as well as in the dialogue, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's just sort of try and protect. The reason why we don't just place this character here, and we don't do it like that, is because then we're loading in all these different objects, and I'm definitely stepping into territory I'm not going to talk about. But there is a reason why it's better just to have a pool of characters loaded, and then it's just referencing them rather than having lots of instances of them. And so, so go to game view. They both have different cameras. So this is, I solo it. This is Mina's camera. This is Felix's camera. So at its bare bones, if I was just to set up a conversation, and it was just like a back and forth between these two characters, it would play this camera when Felix is speaking, and play this camera. Play this camera when Mina was speaking. And obviously, to make that more interesting, you can add more cameras. So this can be done here. Add new camera. So just double check that's Mina's camera. Yeah. So if I wanted to make I don't know, like medium close up, something like that. I might move this forward. Better shot, something like that.
I have an instinctive urge to like this conversation all of a sudden.
Yeah, all the lights here are just coming from the, I guess it's just the ambient in the scene. So
yeah, that'll just be the directional light.
But
we can do that next, actually. So you could play it.
One other thing as well, excuse this being POV, that's just not getting my acronyms right. Depth of field is part of the, I mean, this really should have been updated as a prefab, because every time I'm doing this, I'm probably having to make this change. It's kind of, but these cameras can have these static, this is one way of doing depth of field, which works well for sorry, it comes up here. Works well for when the camera is static.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, that's a great
detail.
detail.
Brings focus to the face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the camera starts moving, it goes out of focus. So we use a different technique for that. But yeah, like it does. I think it obviously to bring it in focus, you get that sort of shallow depth of field, which is goes hand in hand with cinematic style that we're going for. So so this is camera 2, which can be added here. And so I could then in the dialog tool say, okay, after this line, I want it to now only play this camera until further notice, until I change to another camera. So that's kind of how we're editing. So, I might say this is the default camera here, but then the next camera, in fact, it's already doing here, changing Mina camera index to 1. That is a way it's saying, use this character, Mina, what's the index? 1. We will know that 1 is actually 2, 0, 1. So it's and so that's just one way of changing cameras. I think before I go too far ahead on this, maybe it's better to load up the conversation we saw, just to talk about the how we're triggering other things in the dialog tool.
Mm-hmm, that'd be great.
So, I just wanted to show like how quickly it was to set something up. So
I was going to, I mean, like about halfway through that would have been grand for a conversation. Like as in just that two characters having a conversation at the front door or whatever. The 2 shoulder cameras all ready to go. Yeah, you could,
and you can do stuff like you might have you might want a 2-shot, which is for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
just decrease this a bit. Yeah. You might obviously spend more time finessing this than I'm doing right now, but and that's something that could be saved in to prefab if you wanted. I mean, the reality is, it's once you got it there, it's pretty easy just to mess around with the cameras, and that's we never really stuck to what came with the prefabs. We've always edited them. So the prefabs is really just to have something to get you started.
Yeah.
And at least what I was using for. And see this camera here, 2-shot, could be given to both Mina and Felix. So if I was to set Mina's camera to camera 2, which is actually camera 3, and Felix's camera to 1, then the camera wouldn't change. It's kind of like, it's tricking the system. It is technically changing because there's no difference. It's not really doing anything. And so it's just, that's how you get that. That's one way of avoiding the system always cutting. You say, well, let's just make them all on one camera. There are other ways as well, which maybe I'll get into if I look at this conversation setup. I had it. What was it? Savea's house.
Or Eric's house. I don't think for as long as I've been on the project, I don't think I've ever seen Eric. Apart from that, I know that's Samir's house. Is that it's called Eric's house.
We made a mistake of setting up all this stuff right from the start, rather than just waiting until the game was a bit.
And there's a Tom as well that never actually makes an appearance. There's a couple of environments for Tom.
Yeah, it's they've all been changed pretty much. Okay, so here you go. Same situation. So I'll just lock this, and this is an actual conversation. This will have far more camera setups than the one I just looked at. So let's load up the.
Just if you go into the little gizmos drop down there menu when you come back out, Lyndon, you can make those icons much smaller. At the minute, they're kind of obscuring Samir's face. And
okay. Let me just open this and tell me what you mean. So what's that?
So like if you see the little gizmos in the inspector, so over in the scene view.
Yeah.
There's gizmos and there's a little drop down. You can shrink those icons. So if you click that arrow and then drag, and drag that.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so we can see a bit more what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's so many cameras.
Yeah, I think the
spider's web.
The other thing you might want to do is hide the depth of field gizmos. But that's another one that usually makes the scene a little bit cleaner. So if you just, drop that one down and then depth of field targets. Yeah, there we go.
Got it. Probably something I should have done years ago. So here's so maybe I should probably just talk about this dialogue tool and why we're using this, and the I suppose the positives and the negatives with it. It's definitely something that it's one of the oldest bits of tools that we had made, and took quite a long time to build, and it's probably. And it's definitely a design, probably could have been designed better from my end. But we kept on supporting it, but it is a little bit buggy, so we wouldn't use this again. But to explain what this is, it's basically a sequencer. It goes down the list in order, although some things play out all together on the same frame. And other things are sort of coroutines. So the next line, for instance, when it's a dialogue line here, it won't go to the next line until that piece of audio is complete. Once that piece of audio is complete, then it goes down to the next line. And same here, blah, blah. So I guess trying to think if there's another way of imagining this. I guess it's just like a list of events that are happening, which I suppose is sort of what timeline is, but timeline represents it in a way that's more understandable. But there's lots of reasons why we couldn't use timeline. It had to be something where it had the ability to, I suppose, there's lots of branches here, so each one of these branches could be a timeline maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is what we used, and so maybe it makes sense just to go down each one of these lines and explain what's going on. Mm-hmm. So it's, that might give a bit of insight into what's going on here. So these first two lines are what we call resting emotion tags. So all the facial animation in the game is simulated or generated by a piece of software which we license called Speech Graphics, and it's a really clever, black box where you put stuff into it and you get animation out. And I don't think anyone in the team pretends to know how it works. It's like learning and stuff like that, and that's what you pay for when you get it. But the basics of it is that you give a rig, and all our characters use the same rig to make this possible, I suppose, or easier to work with. And you feed it audio, and the rig has been trained to understand, to some degree, the the character's voice, the actor's voice, there's some calibration on that. And based on what the audio you give it, it will then generate lip sync. And more than that, though, it will give some character performance. And so just giving the audio, you get that. But then to embellish on that, you can tag up the lines, mark up the lines with sort of specific emotions. And we had a set of 6 emotions. And off the bat, I think now sad, fear, disgust, anger, happy, surprise. And supposedly that's supposed to cover every single emotion, some degree to that. In the so all the facial emotion will be taken care of inside the FBX. It will be baked in, there'll be emotion in there. But when the character isn't speaking, or when the animation finishes, then it will just default back to its neutral pose. So you get these weird moments where characters are laughing, speaking, then they just go. And there's a moment of it just looks artificial. And so we have these ways of tagging up the conversation with emotions, so that when they reset out of the speech graphics animation, it resets to an emotion which represents, I suppose, the last emotion that they're speaking in. And it also helps for, like, if someone says a line of dialogue and that person's really annoyed by that, they can look disgusted even when they're not speaking. So that's what these are. So you tag the character and then you choose the emotion. Oh, look, here we are. I could have just showed that rather than remembering. So yeah, that's what this is. Camera shot. We've already discussed this. You're just picking a list of cameras. Color would be cool if we had somehow a drop-down box here of seeing all the cameras that were there. But I guess we just didn't go far enough with editing this tool. So we're reliant on you picking a number here that exists. If I was to put like 100 in here, I'm sure there'll be a bug or something out of range. So there's no checks there to make sure that doesn't happen, but that's fine because we're the only ones using it, so we can kind of manage that. So then it goes to a line of dialogue. So I spoke earlier about head look, how characters always look at the person that's speaking. So when someone's not speaking, they're always looking at the person who is speaking. But when someone is speaking, we don't know who they're supposed to be speaking to unless we decide that. So this is why every line of dialogue has the option of saying who is this person speaking to, who are they addressing when they are talking. And this, is kind of obvious in this conversation. You've got 2 characters speaking to the other character in the scene. But if there's 3 characters in the scene that might be addressing someone else, or if you might want a bit of character performance, but they're speaking to a non-character. So you might create a new character here, and it might just be like a visual, it might be called visual lookout point. You might have that somewhere on the floor so that they can be talking to the floor. And so suddenly you've got a bit of performance where the character is looking down and looking a bit sheepish while they're sort of delivering their line of dialogue. So you're sort of customizing the performance using this tool. Another thing that you can do, and we do, is change head look mid-conversation. So here, Samir starts talking and is immediately speaking to Mina. But I might put look at and say Samir. Okay, I don't have another option. Imagine I had another character here. So you might sort of speak to one character and then at a specific line, you might then look to the other character, which, kind of naturally how people speak, but you might actually want to deliberately say when a line is change of tone, you might want to direct it to someone who's scolding or something like that. And so here I would, and this is where tools again quite finicky, is you just put in a delay. So it's like saying, at some point in this conversation, and I could, this preview doesn't actually work for me on this computer, but I would preview this line and it would come up in iTunes or something, and I could basically count and it only needs to be rough with this, doesn't need to be like super precise. But if it's sort of like roughly 2.5 seconds or 2.2 seconds that I want the head look to change, then I would put a delay of 2 seconds in here, and I'd have to click this, which means that it goes to the next line while still waiting. So it's otherwise, if I didn't do that, it would wait 2 seconds and then play the line, which you might want in some certain situations, but most of the time you want it to be counting in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a bit on head look, and it's kind of amazing what you get away with just just a little bit of head look, how much character that gives to these 3D models.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really incredible because like you're really using cinematography tricks, right? It's like that pacing, the cut between like shots and things like that to really create that very tense moments and things like that. Well, it's really incredible to see the scene and then like see how you break down. You really understood that it's down to like a few seconds before people move, or what's the most natural feeling like scene being built out. And I love that you created it. Like this tool is really great, by the way.
It's fantastic. I love how it's tied to the rigs as well, and like I wonder the emotions. So when you have the angry or the serious and all that, is it one rig shared amongst the characters, like one facial rig?
It was, but we later on in the project we had the ability to train one facial rig per hero character, or at least it was. Got better results. The further away the rig got from the base model, the less good it looked. So initially we just had like a default character, but because we have sort of old man, young man, old woman, young woman, child, etc. It was in the end we tailored that to those. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 facial rigs that we could use that meant that all the NPCs that you might have an old man, he would use the old man rig. But for the longest time we just used one rig. But it was just really to sort of make the animations look better. I mean, we should say we've been using speech graphics for a few years now, and they had updated their technology as well. So I think they were keen to sort of show us, you get better results now that we do it this way. And so we updated, we baked all the animations sort of near at the end of the project.
Is that when you have to give like the actors something weird to say, like a weird script, so that they had
that
strange
calibration? Yeah, there's a calibration. There's some text that we got all the actors to read out, which supposedly incorporates all the phonemes, and they do in all the different emotions. So it's something that the software can learn, and it ended up being quite strange bits of recording time where the actors are a bit confused why we're getting to read these nonsensical things. But we did explain why we were using them. So one other thing about the about the dialogue tool in general, I guess the main reason why we wanted to do this in the tool is that when I create a line, I'll do it now, it's a statement, it automatically generates this GUID, this ID, which I guess is a number so random that there's probably, infinitesimal chance that you'll ever get the same one again. I guess it's just a random number that's generated, which we can know is going to be unique. And so because that's created for us, we just need to create the audio file, we name it this, and the animation file, we also name this. And that's all we need to do. And then the system takes care of everything else. So there's no like pairing of references. There's no sort of like naming an audio file something else and dropping it in like some sort of container. It's all just done out of the box, and it's kind of one of that's actually one of the things that I'm glad that we did do, because there's a lot of lines, and it would have been they would have been prone to error as well, like dropping in wrong audio clips into these lines. So that's.
Did we work out how many lines of dialogue there is?
Oh my!
I think
it's about 4,500 or something like that.
Wow.
Oh,
Crazy.
It's a lot of lines of dialogue.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of lines of dialogue, and there is more than that, but we sort of trimmed it down, and we all did lots of stuff that we just tossed out. And so we had quite a few recording sessions with the actors, and we did that over basically from the beginning. So we didn't just do a mega recording session at the end. We
kept bringing the actors back.
Yeah, which in hindsight, I'm surprised that we got away with doing that, because we had no retainer contract with these actors. These actors could have said, no, don't want to do that anymore. And we just, we had a big cast as well. So
right.
It's, but fortunately all the actors were left working on it. So I'm sure that they didn't want to not work with us again. So that all worked out. So just to keep on going down, this is basically how the game knows that you're making a dialogue choice. So you add, I won't do it because it's actually a bit messy. It adds a whole load of stuff. It basically adds in this question, and then 3 of these bits, and then also these go-tos, which are links to where it's going to go to next. And these can be different, or they can be the same, obviously. In this example, they're the same. So it goes to a question that will be on Mina's face, because a question will always be on, it will treat it as if that's the player character's camera's arm. So camera will go to the player character, and now you have 3 different options. This is just the text you get in the game about how to make a decision. It's always quite confusing what you should name these things, whether it should be precisely what's being said or whether you should try and have fun with them. So maybe there's not a ton of consistency between that, but we try to sort of make it that what's said here kind of reflects what the tone of what the character will say next. So then it says a line, and then it goes to this go-to, which is a branch. So this is where the branching dialogue come into play. Actually, in this situation, we don't have any branching dialogue because Samir is just ignoring what Mina's saying. So he's just going off on a rant. So he's just going to say the same thing regardless. And here's a new thing here. So there's another thing what he does here is, so the clip, there's a bit of animation here. It says standing head shake subtle. So what a gesture is, or at least what we call a gesture, is every character has a starting animation, and this can be selected here. So you can either use some of the default ones, which are located in the sort of base animated controller. We tended to stray away from that because actually we realized that we were getting our animators to make more and more bespoke setups. So we used this method instead, which is just to say, I'm going to tell you what the animation is going to be explicitly. So in fact, it's called Samir intro because it's Samir's introduction. So these these poses are built specifically for this conversation. But they could be used somewhere else. Any character, because the characters all share the same rig, might not share the same face rig, but they share the same sort of body rig. So all these animations can be shared between all characters, which is great because it meant that we could reuse stuff. And a lot of time, that's how we were deciding what gets made, how much reusability it has, just to save on sort of content generation and things like that. So it starts in this pose, and I'll just demonstrate that. So if I was to change this to me standing, And I have to reset this in order for this to work. Something's gone wrong. I think I know why. I'm going to change this to something else.
It was one of my favorite things to go back through the game and see all of those gestures suddenly appearing in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have like those static kind of two people standing and talking, and then you go back and one of the characters would be checking their nails, or know that like the animator Noah would have gone through and added a little gesture here or gesture there, and it's they add so much to those conversations. They just make such a huge difference, like having those little bespoke character traits that come through.
It was definitely something that we built up over time as well, because we started off with a very few set of poses, and the cameras were built for that. As we refined it, so we did a second pass, third pass, etc. That added new poses in, and so often what that meant is we would change the blocking. So we'd say, oh, this character maybe would be more interested in sat down. Have to change the cameras because of that, but that's kind of okay because cameras are all there. We're just going to change the positions, and so it was nice that making changes like that wasn't like a massive pain to accommodate, and was definitely improved the quality by having lots more bespoke poses. So I'll put that back, if I can remember what it was. Mina's sitting forward, but you can see that Mina's standing there with her arms folded, and that was what the what I selected. So now she's back to that. That's useful, obviously, for like changing cameras and things. But these can be changed mid-conversation, and we'll get to that shortly. But what a gesture is, I suppose we're saying a gesture is not. That's still the idol, but the gesture will do something and then revert back to the idol. And so we use that as sort of these one-off moments. So here actually is an example. It's just a head shake, and because we've got lots of these bespoke idols, we didn't want to have to do, okay, so Mina's sitting down on the chair in this scene, let's do a gesture where she's head shaking specifically for that setup. We just want to say, no, can't we just additively shake the head? And so we had a checkbox here to, I guess it's just muting all the other bones. Well, I don't know specifically how to think, but it's limiting it just to the neck and the head. And so that head can be, that head animation can be applied to any pose at all. So we don't have to make more. We only have to make one head shake, basically. And so that plays, then the line of dialogue, and then this is an example of a full body gesture. So I can search for this to show you what it looks like. So that's the pose that Samir's in already. That's his idol pose. It starts from that. And then we're saying what a gesture is you do a one-off thing. And then in this case, it goes back to, it loops back round. So that would just look seamless. You can just say, here's a finger wag, back down. But it can also be used to transition from idol to idol. So I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Because there's another gesture here, but we've covered that. There's a moment in a second where I'll come back to this. I'll just show you so here there's a gesture which is the same sort of thing. Mina forward closed. So this will be actually you can see examples of the characters in a different outfit, but it doesn't matter. You can see it's not going back. So if we were just to play that gesture, what would happen is it would just go like that, and it would snap back or probably blend back to the idol. So this is not designed for that. This is designed as a transition between one idol state to another. So then we've got this thing here, I inject idol, and that's basically changing this. it's updating that. So it's changing it to Mina sitting closed. There you go. There's an idle in the pose. So that gets updated to that. And because these, it's just one of the quirks of this system, I suppose, is that these two get played at the same time unless stated otherwise. So that's why we put a delay here. And that delay is based kind of on me looking at the animation clip and seeing how long it is before it gets to the end.
Based on the length of the animation, essentially. So that
exactly, roughly 1 second long. Right. But because there's a blend, and the blend is roughly 0.5 seconds, changing around here, 0.5 seconds seems to work.
You don't have to be perfectly exact. It would be a kind of a pain to achieve, right?
No, there is some degree, although there are moments where you play and you do have to play a few times just to sort of get it right. So it would be great if you could preview that, so you didn't have to play a conversation, make a change, play a conversation. So the iteration time on that isn't so great, but it's okay because you can make a good guess, and then it's maybe if you don't get it first time, you get it second time. So yeah, that was changing from animation pose to animation pose. I skipped over this earlier. There's just a separate thing here called the mid-dialogue event, which I'll cover when we talk about the audio. But this is basically, well, it's being able to trigger anything from script. Often we use it for audio, but it could be used for sort of other things. And you could trigger some objects to turn off in the scene. You could trigger the lighting change. You wouldn't do that because we've got a system for it, but you can do anything there. But often we're just triggering it for audio. So this is how Samir slaps his knee, and so I've recorded that animation and I've synced some audio so that if that plays at the same time, that audio plays at the same time this animation is triggered, it will create a sound relation between the animation and the audio. These are used a lot for the music system I'm going to talk about later. Trying to see if there's so here is an example of branching dialogue. So you got a decision to make. If you say put a socket, if you say these two, it goes this stuff in here which is text. Shut me up. So that goes to this line, which goes to response shut me up. But if you put a sock in it, why bother coming here? It goes here, and it goes on a different branch. You can see how this becomes, it's a little bit difficult to read. You can imagine how this, if you had a tree, you'd be able to visually see this better. But we're just accepting that you can follow these links and get it. But it's not the most intuitive way of representing branching dialogue, but
I have to say that the dialogue tool scared me quite a lot. I don't know. I didn't venture into it too often. Only when absolutely necessary. Just
it
for that very reason,
at first.
Following things and the fear of just breaking something or.
Well, chat's really enjoying it. Cajun says this is really going to the nitty-gritty details, and Lickbean says, legit, this stream has taught me a lot about interactive cutscenes. So they're really appreciating it.
Oh, that's cool.
And because we are going into all this detail, I mean, we will be uploading these videos to YouTube. So if you ever want to look back and, sometimes you need to play this section more than once to kind of have it stick in your brain. So you'll be able to do that when we upload the videos up on YouTube.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
But just to sort of, I think I'm probably coming to the end of what I need to talk about on this. I mean, is this another example of these resting emotion tags? You set it once, it will persist until it sees another one and changes. So Mina might have been in like either a neutral pose, a neutral motion, or disgusted. But then, because this line, we can feed the pigeons, the recording of that, the actor sort of said it with a smile. I didn't want it to go from, we could feed the pigeons with a smile, and then it go back to like a weird emotion. So that's why I put that there and not on the other line. So you can really sort of finesse this. And this definitely wouldn't have been something I would have put in the first pass. This probably would have been one of the last things I've done in the game, going through and doing the pass on this, because it's such like a finite detail, but it kind of helps with the believability of the performance. So you can see more changing of the idols here. So we've covered that. And then an end. So when the dialogue ends, conversation's over, and it in the script it goes to the next thing. So I think that was kind of all I needed to talk about. Oh, one other thing. I want to talk about this just because it wasn't present in this conversation, but what we found is, we'd have a cutscene of, as an example, of someone holding a knife. Someone brings a knife out, and then we want to go into a conversation where that person's still holding a knife. But the way that this is, I can't just drop a knife into this character that's in the scene, because as I said before, the character isn't in the scene. It's loaded at runtime. It's not something that I can affect here. So we have to, and anything that we want to change on the character has to be done via some script. So
any spoilers in there?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think there's a couple.
Okay, well, people can pause that and ruin.
This is a spoil. I mean, all our streams are spoiler warnings at this point. Lickbean says in chat, I feel like you guys went a step beyond what BioWare did with Mass Effect. I was actually just gonna say, I find it so interesting that you're talking about this, because the whole Mass Effect series just got revamped recently, and people have been replaying it and watching the dialogue system. I'm like, wow, this is I really love that game, and watching this is really a nice revelation to seeing how to break all that down, because there is a lot of going into that. Especially all these subtle scenes, the gestures are the thing that I think make the biggest difference.
Yeah, we really wanted it for as much of this to be made by a designer, more than relying on sort of big set pieces of animation. We're using those for cutscenes. We know how costly they are to generate, and so making these little gestures that we can do here and there to control the timings of things inside an editor, rather than, I don't know how other games might do it, but I could imagine maybe you just have one long idle or one long piece of animation which syncs to a bunch of dialogue, and so maybe that, or motion captured and things like that. Maybe that would do better, but it would be we didn't have the resources to do that. So that's why we're thinking small, how to start off with the base level of what's acceptable, which is just a pose. And then we add onto that these idols, so these gestures and idle changes. And once we had a roster of a classic one was the arm folding, someone standing and to an arm fold and then down again. Use that loads of times when someone's just in a default standing pose and they want to show some emotion, just sort of dresses the scene a bit more, kind of adds a bit more character into it. So I was saying this you can see here, maybe you can't see, but there's a phone now in her hand. And it kind of looks like it's not in the right place, but it is in the right place when she animates. It's kind of parented to her hand. The way that this works, I'll just show how that system works. So in the prefab, we have an accessories script where we have all these different accessories: gun, mug, name tag. And there's a bunch of enums here that are set in a script somewhere that you can attach to, and that's what the conversation system's referencing. And these are all turned off as default, obviously, because you don't want all these things live when you don't need them, but they are turned on if they're turned on if the conversation asks that to happen. So that's just something else that could do. And one last thing, you can change the outfits. So main characters have the ability to change their outfits in game. So actually, all their outfits are in this in this work, which is to say, basically the default. So if I was to do that,
I can show.
There's a different outfit there, or there's a different outfit here. But she does have another outfit, which is, I think, special. Which you've probably seen already. I've seen it in the kind of like a Ripley-esque overalls. So it's just like you can you can just change your outfits, I guess, and you can decide on what the character should be wearing. And some of the characters have lots of different outfits. It's quite fun. You can see that characters have. Actually, I think she does have a bed outfit as well. Which is maybe a little bit risque.
Oh. I was going to say
undressed.
We can have a look at.
But you never see the character like that. So we don't, we're not like doing male gaze or anything. But it's just that she's in like the way that her animation is. Like, that's not a not a good pose for her in that outfit. But yeah, I'll change that.
Please don't ban us, Twitch.
I was going to say we can look at Vivek and Becky in another conversation. They can swap their costumes easy enough.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's everything about the conversation system. There are, there's probably more to go over, but I think that's about the basis of it. As I say, we'll go back to the dialogue tool later on when we go through the audio. So have another look then.
Perfect. So yeah, we're gonna go for a 5-minute break, and when we're back, we're gonna talk about the lighting system and how these scenes are lit. We'll be looking at Nick's screen share, and Nick can walk us through that. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Stick around.
And we're back. And
hello.
Thanks so much for sticking around. That was great. We just finished talking about all the dialogue system, which was great. Actually, in the break, Nick and I were talking about like why all those gestures were so great. And Nick, you were talking about a very specific reference.
Yeah, there's an episode of The Simpsons where Milhouse sells his soul to Bart, or gives his soul to Bart, and there's one little sequence where he's talking about it in church, where he does this little thing with his hands, where he's talking about the soul floating off into the air or something, but it's just this little animation gesture where he does this little thing. But one of the characters in Last Stop doesn't do that, but does something kind of similar with their hand, and it adds so much to that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a Simpsons gift maker somewhere, isn't there? There's one that you can just kind of rattle those out. I'm sure someone can find it.
Somebody find it. And it's so, yeah. And I thought it was just so funny because then I was going to mention to Lyndon, this reminds me so much of the episode in Futurama, also Matt Groening. And then the gesture that Leela makes with all her salt shaker when they go back in time in the 50s to meet Fry's himself as his grandfather. So I thought it was really great. Like those are the moments that really make the animation. Those are really long time ago. Those episodes were like a good 10, 15 years ago. And they really stayed in my mind really vividly. And I think, that's what's happening in this game as well.
I think that's probably hopefully what's going to happen with those conversations as well. I think those little moments really do kind of stand out. I think it shows the animators having fun, right? Like it's not just kind of dot to dot like a walk sequence or whatever. It's kind of it's expressive and interesting and fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. Somebody in chat earlier asked like, is there a pose randomizer? And it was so interesting that Linda went through and was like, no, we specifically create these very specific like animations and transitions for specifically the scene. And that's what makes it feel unique. As gamers, we're pretty like good at like recognizing patterns. I've mentioned this in the past. So when we see loops, it's like our brain catches it and it like takes us away a little bit. We don't always like, it's not always like game breaking or like doesn't break the illusion, but it's definitely something we noticed. So I think this is why this game, even just like that tiny little scene you played at the beginning, it just feels really lived in, very real, So yeah,
I think it's kind of cool showing this stuff as well, because when you live with it for so long, you sort of take a lot of this stuff for granted. But like, not every game has fully animated faces for every single conversation, especially a game that has like 300 conversations or whatever it is, isn't it? And 4,000 lines of dialogue, and it's kind of
we're so happy. Like it's like 100 milliseconds in the game that was imperceptible, but you put like hundreds of hours of work behind it to make it happen with custom tools and bespoke like animation. So it's great. We're super happy to show it off for you. Hassan, what are we?
Another thing that you like hand place and tailor is the lighting in each scene, right? And so I think, Nick, maybe we can jump to your screen and you can show us how you light a scene. We're going to look at like the time of day and like how the lighting changes throughout, like at different times of day. And also going to look at optimization in relation to lighting.
I think optimization, the optimization stuff kind of, I guess, leads on pretty smoothly from the lighting. So we'll touch on a few bits, but then we can specifically cover some optimization stuff as well. If
Sounds great.
Have a look at that too. Right. It's kind of interesting talking about all of this stuff together, like at the same time. So like Lyndon showing the dialogue tool there and the conversations, and how we start off with something rough just to get something in quickly, and then we kind of build on top of that, and then as we go through the game and doing more passes over the top of them, we add more stuff. And I guess I've kind of tried to lay out the lighting, and I'll go through a bunch of the lighting with that in mind. So in all of the environments, in every scene, there is a lighting profile, and that's set by the time of day system. And that's if you don't add any other lights to the scene, it'll still have that sort of environment light. So Unity's environment light settings, where you can have tricolor or what have you, skybox and stuff. That's always in there, even before you've added extra lights. So I will show those lighting profiles. We can have a little look at those. And just to be clear, like, so the time of day for us is about setting specific times of day for a chapter or for a section of a chapter. It's not about sort of a transition. So like if you stand around for 6 hours, it doesn't transition to noon from dusk or dawn or whatever. It's more about just a shortcut to get those times of day setups going quickly. Having said that, you could in theory set up what we've got to do those transitions, but I'll show that. We can animate the profile that runs on, and we use that for lightning, for example. So like the sky box flashes and that kind of thing. So once you've got your time of day lighting, then you start looking at scene specific lights. And then after that, we'll start looking at specific lights for the directed camera sections, for the conversations, and then for the cutscenes. And it's easier if I just show those rather than kind of chatting about them. But that's roughly how we're going to go through them. And then I guess it's worth just mentioning some of the kind of more global aspects of our lighting, and these were mostly performance considerations. So we have no baked lighting in the game at all. We just don't use that system for a bunch of different reasons. We are using deferred rendering. Again, when we come to the performance section, I can specifically talk a little bit about that. And some of the drawbacks and some of the benefits of using deferred rendering, but mostly with regards to the lights, it means that we can use a load more lights without a huge hit to the frame rate. So if they're not shadow casting lights, with deferred rendering, you tend to be able to have a lot more lights in. So that's kind of useful for us. So I think that was the initial reason for picking it. I've also implemented a blanket ban on shadow casting point lights. So they will be removed wherever they're discovered. They're just, I find they were the number one culprit for low frame rates. And
something we hear often. We're limiting the use of point lights.
Yeah, well, I just removed them completely. I think because I mean I read somewhere, I don't know how accurate it is, but they're roughly equivalent to having 6 shadow casting spotlights, which I guess makes sense. Like if you've got a box it kind of would be 6 shadow casting spotlights, which is just, it's too much. We're kind of working on narrow margins, so if there's a way of getting rid of it, it's done. And when we get to that point, I can show like one of the ways that we worked around not having point lights with shadows. So an example of how you can kind of work around that limitation and kind of cheat your way to get the same effect.
Yeah.
And then also in the same sort of kind of line is that using cookies a lot. I love cookies. and I'm putting them all over the place and using them for all sorts of different things. Like faking shadows and they're a really good performance kind of thing.
I'm wondering if you could delve a bit deeper into the no baked lighting, because some might consider baked lighting to be actually performant because you're not, it's not real time. So what was the reason behind that?
There were 2 considerations. I'm sort of trying to remember back to when we did discuss baked lighting, and I did spend a good few weeks testing it out and lighting our scenes and going through that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
One issue that we came up against was a technical issue, which with the number of transitions that we have, with the number of additive scenes that we have, and the jumping around from time of day to time of day and from scene to scene, we find that you would have had to have multiple lighting data sets per scene that you would have to be able to swap out at runtime, which to a certain extent was possible to do, but it became really difficult to manage. Like being able to change the set of light maps that an environment was using at runtime was not straightforward. It was quite tricky to get going. And I think, given another few weeks or another month or whatever, I think Ed probably could have cracked that and got it working. But it was going to be a lot of work, and it was right at the very start of that process as well. We had a lot of real-time lighting in there, so the idea of completely migrating the game to baked lighting when we weren't 100% sure we could get there, and we kind of hit all of those issues. I think that was the first blocker. I think I have to be honest, from my point of view, creatively, I was actually quite relieved when we didn't go with baked lighting, because I kind of hit a lot of process problems with it, a lot of workflow problems with it.
Yeah.
So again, with our, like Lyndon was mentioning earlier, we shoot a lot of environments from different angles, and we'll have them at different times of day. I'll get into it a little bit. What we also do is sort of alter the objects. So like a time of day, like you might have the breakfast objects and tables set up at dawn, and then you'll go back to that scene later on in the same chapter, and it'll be evening, and the evening time of day will have, like for example in John's flat there is like a table with leaves, the way you can like fold up a table, and then a dining table that stretches out from like a little round table to a long kind of longer dining table, so it changes shape over the course of the day. So if I bake the lighting at the start, the shadows will be baked in for one shape of table, then we swap that out, then the shadows could be baked for like a slightly different set of props on the table, or the tables change shape, or the chairs have moved. And because we're leaping around so much, there were just so many different lighting things that we needed to keep track of, and having to bake every single one of those and keep track of all of the different things it would have been tricky. So we've had to do a bunch of things to get the game to run efficiently without using baked lighting. So everything is real time. So yeah, we'll have a look at some of the tricks that we've had to kind of implement to work around that. But yeah, those are the main reasons. So we had some technical difficulties in getting multiple additive scenes using different data sets and swapping them out in and out. And then also I think the workflow was tricky for me as well. So that's why we avoided it. And yeah. So I will open a scene here. So we've got.
Yeah. Let's jump into the editor.
We have got. This is actually, Lyndon, you were mentioning here. I think this is where Stevie used to live, possibly. Is it in real life, maybe?
Yeah, to that building there.
That part of London.
That flat,
so that's where this environment comes from. So this is an environment that we use quite a lot, and we use it in more than one of the stories, and we use it at multiple times a day. So if at the minute what you're seeing here in the game view is a cutscene. So it's a cutscene camera. It's a really simple shot. It's just a way of framing the environment. I'm going to turn that off. So what I was saying about what you get by default, when we set up our time of day, is without going in and adding extra lights per scene or anything else, you get several, vibes quite quickly. If you were scripting a chapter and you wanted a scene at night, you don't have to worry about waiting for me to do the lights for that chapter. You can just set it to this time of day, and you get the look of night pretty quickly. And that is, a lot of that is defined by the lighting profile.
And so is that your own little tool you've set up to have these lighting profiles, or is that something that
the time of day system, I think, was there before I arrived, or possibly just after I arrived. So I think the time of day was implemented by, and I'm really sorry, I'm going to mispronounce his name so badly, but Jonathan van Immerziel. I think Unity folks will probably know him from he's Stagard Creations on the assets.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
So Jonathan was working on the game, I guess before I arrived. So he did the first pass on lots of the lighting, and I guess the game would have been a much different shape at that time. So it would have been like there was a whole travel system and stuff. So moving between each environment and everything. So he set up that time of day initially. And then I think we built a lot on top of it since then. So if we have a quick look here, let's just look. So
shout out to Staggered Creations, has amazing environment and water assets and shaders. On the
I think he was working. When he was working on Last Stop, he was also working on Lake. Which is, I think, coming out this year. So he was, and he was only on the project for a relatively short amount of time, but he did have a big impact by creating these, creating all these systems that we still use now. So it was great to have him set all that stuff up.
We posted a link to his store page in the chat.
Yeah, that's so cool though. I had no idea that he was actually on this.
He was working on it.
That's great.
So let's see, what can you see? Okay, right. So that's the wrong one, of course. So I'm used to working on my screen's usually bigger. It's profile. Right, we'll lock that. So so that is the profile that's currently being applied to the scene. So when I set this little drop-down menu, it's the equivalent of in script writing time of day, set to dawn or set to night. So it applies those settings that you just saw in the lighting profile, and you can see them updating in the lighting settings. So if you go to noon, you can see it changes the environment lighting, right? So you can, if you wanted to, you could do all this kind of stuff. So Unity kind of used that's that kind of ambient light that gets applied to the scene when there are no lights necessarily. So it's a good start, and it kind of, I guess in a way it's a stand-in to a certain extent for that bait lighting. I mean, it's not a one-to-one replacement by any stretch, but if
it provides a base,
gets you at least a little part of the way there, especially in exterior scenes. If you it sort of implies that bounce light, and it implies a little bit of the atmosphere of the time of day that you've got. Like, it's a very, very basic just starting point for all of the rest of the lighting is getting that color right.
And if you don't set these and you set everything to pure black, then if you didn't have a light in the scene would literally be pitch black. So
absolutely,
it gives you a foundation.
Definitely. And those profiles do. Where are we? There we are. So those profiles cover those. So basically, what these are doing is these are, it's a scriptable object that mirrors those settings. I think you can probably ignore a bunch of them, but it's effectively copying what you set in this scriptable object onto those scene settings. And it updates every time it changes. So whenever you set that in script, that's what it does. It loads the colors that you set there. These are just like sort of bookmarks basically for those settings. It also plugs into the skybox. which I'm not going to open because it's quite spaghetti-like at this stage. But it's, like it sort of mirrors the same thing. So if you've got a bright blue ambient light in your scene, then you want a blue sky to kind of match that, right? So it's pretty straightforward. It copies those same things across to the material. It sets the clouds. It also sets the fog settings. So these, it's basically just a way of storing lighting settings that you want to apply later on at runtime.
Right. Nice.
So that's what those profiles are doing. And the lighting settings loader also, so it'll apply that profile. It also activates an object. So in Dawn, we've got just loose in the Dawn lighting scene, we've got a directional light, which is set quite low, so you get nice stretched out shadows for Dawn. The directional light will be colored, obviously, to kind of give it more of an orangey yellowy kind of vibe. And also there's our reflection probe. So at its most basic level, when you set the time of day in the script, it will load or activate, I should probably more accurately say, the Dawn object, which is a directional light and a reflection probe, and that's all. So again, if you were setting up a directed camera to walk through that scene, that you could pretty much just get away with just doing that. And that's a perfect starting point. So we've got dawn, noon, we've got dusk. I really like dusk in this environment. And then night. So again, night contains obviously that lighting profile, which gives you the ambient color. It's got the directional light. But additionally, then we can add things, because we have these separate additive scenes, you can have things that will only be in night and not in anything else. So in this case, we have emissive windows. So we have a ton of these objects all over the scene that you wouldn't want, at noon. No one's going to have their house lights on at noon. The street lights aren't going to be on at noon. So having these all in a separate scene, generally speaking, if it's night, you'll want all of this stuff. So we have those in the lighting scenes. I guess it's worth pointing out that we have lighting scenes for every environment. I mean, we kind of touched on this earlier. So like loading up additively for each level, we'll have gameplay scenes, which you can see here, kind of labeled with the story that they're part of. But then I get lighting scenes for each time of day that we're going to be using for that particular environment. And that's where I keep those standard lights. It's also where I keep specific lights for lighting conversations and for directional lights, which we can turn on per directional camera, or directed camera, or per conversation. Is
it worth mentioning for performance that when you're loading a chapter, you're selecting what lighting you need? So it's not going to be loading in everything. It'll just be loading in, say, this scene here, which is called Fault Row. There might be a chapter you only need it at night time. So it wouldn't load in all the other scene layers.
I think that's those extra lighting scenes are part of that same process, or that part of that same system where at the start of the chapter you would make a list of all of the things that you're going to need for that chapter and only load those in, because we're loading a lot of scenes, and if there's a way of saving some memory and not loading them in, then you might as well do it, because there's no point in, as you say, there's no point in loading the night time of day with all of the windows if you're not going to use them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sort of like, as in, like, just kind of barreling through this.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, other things that we kind of ended up using time of day for are weather effects. So in a similar way, like if you wanted a rain time of day, you can stick your particles in that environment. It means you don't have to worry about them being turned on during noon or whatever else. And it means you can also go in and set the sky to a much more murky gray. You can color correct the whole scene. You can turn down the directional light to give that kind of overcast sort of feel to the shadows and all the rest of it. And because all of that's in a completely separate scene and a separate setup, you don't have to worry about that interacting with anything else. So in this case, we've got like stuff like decals for puddles and things like that, which would only exist, there you go.
I mean, of course, you have a whole preset for rain.
Yeah,
considering where the game is set.
A whole set for
a lot of rain in the game.
There is a lot of rain. And then that, I'm trying to think of the best way of showing this. I think it is possibly, might risk just hitting play and see what happens. But those lighting profiles that I was showing a minute ago as being sort of bookmarks for the settings that you want for the scene, there is a way of animating them at runtime. So Timeline always just lives on its own in there. So for lightning, rather than doing anything terribly elaborate, I'm pretty sure there we go. So there's the lighting. That's the animated lighting profile component. So basically, it's doing exactly the same job as the light profile loader that I showed you a minute ago, so that you'd set one off in script. But it updates every time something changes. So I think if it's marked as dirty, I think that's what it's called in Unity. Like if the value is marked as dirty, then it updates it every frame. So if the value changes between 2 frames, it updates the whole profile. So it's effectively, loading a bunch of profiles as I'm animating. We didn't use this for anything more elaborate than a little flash. So I think you can see.
Yeah,
let's see.
That's very well done.
So so the sky exposure goes up to, sky exposure goes up to like 2 or 3 or whatever, and the cube map intensity, so the clouds actually get a bit brighter or whatever, and that was kind of enough to do that. I guess you probably could have pushed that further if you wanted to, and you could probably transition from. In fact, you can, but I'll knock it in. We did have a sequence where there's a time lapse.
Yeah, that's just about to mention.
And that does go through multiple lighting profiles. So effectively, what I've done there is take the live version of the lighting profile, if you will, and copied the values of 4 or 5 separate lighting profiles into that as keyframes, and then animated them on a timeline, so you can sort of transition between multiple times a day as well. So I guess this is kind of in keeping with the ethos of all of the other tools we've shown so far, is that they start off doing one job and then they get added onto and they get sort of manhandled a bit into doing something that they weren't initially designed to do, and you kind of just commandeer them to do what you want. So I guess the lighting effect is a good example.
As you realize what you actually need the tool to do, you keep developing the tool while building the game as well, right?
Absolutely. And also, if you can push it a little bit further and get something more out of it, then that's kind of fun.
Do you see this team using a lot of these tools again for like future projects? Do you think these can be ripped out of this project and plugged into a different project? Or
that's a good question.
I think definitely, if not the if not the actual code, I think the concepts and the experience that we learn from it, I think would inform what we build next. But
it go a long way.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I'm sort of learning stuff now, and I'm looking at this. So I sort of don't know the extent of what I know about the lighting system is changing the drop-down box and seeing things change. So it's interesting to see like how robust it is and how much it can affect the game.
Something I love about these streams is that even in previous streams, I think Carol can attest to this, is we found that like teammates are finding a greater appreciation for each other when they're seeing the depths and the complexities of what they work on. They'll start asking each other questions in the middle of the stream. It's great. So is that how we did that? It's like
that is literally, I think that literally happens every stream where somebody's like, I had no idea you worked so hard on that. We just asked for it, especially if there's like a creative director on the stream or something like that, or some sort of artistic director. They had a vision and they're like, just go do it. So, without knowing the
It's like
extent.
a team building experience.
Yeah. Chat saying that's a really great, nice, simple trick. Matisse Tech asked if that blend that you just did for the lightning, can that be used on a 2D animator?
Interesting. I don't know. As a 2D animator component?
I guess so. I'm not really sure what they mean by that.
So at its simplest, that's literally just some values being animated on the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So the complicated bit, or the bit that needed code support on that, was that the scriptable object initially, when it was set up, was only really supposed to be used to set those values when active. So I guess you could apply the same theory to pretty much any component that you can animate. I think the issue with the lighting profile is that those scriptable objects weren't designed to be dragged onto the timeline. So you can't just drag those values into timeline and animate them with a keyframe. So there had to be sort of like a go-between. So if the component, I'm not quite sure what the component is, the 2D animator, but if the component is like that and that's the issue, then having a sort of a go-between which holds on to the value and then sets the value is the way to do it. So if you can get something you can animate in timeline, take that value and then apply it to the thing that doesn't get animated in timeline, then that's kind of the system that's in work there.
Yeah.
Which there's something in the back of my head I've had to do before. I can't think of which component doesn't like timeline, or doesn't get on with timeline and needs that. Certainly the lighting settings is one of them, and that's the way around it, making a sort of a go-between to transfer those every frame.
We should probably say that the version of Unity that we're using is probably quite old compared to what's released now. So these things might have been updated later. It's just because any update that we make is quite a big decision, and so we were sort of trying. Nick, maybe you could share what version of that. Still on 19, is
it? 2019.4.17 F1.
Yeah.
Specifically.
So timeline might have been updated quite a lot since.
Yep. So. Possibly, yeah. Let me just see the next thing I was going to do. But yeah, I guess a conversation, we could look at lighting a conversation. That might be kind of interesting. But yeah, that process of going from timeline to other stuff is, I really like timeline. I really like timeline for a bunch of reasons, and I think we kind of use it in its most straightforward sense in cutscenes, obviously, because they're just like kind of canned animation. But I think cutscenes were the thing I find the most fun to light, because it gives you freedom to kind of just animate everything you want, move things around. I have a few examples I'll show in a bit, but I think if you can get something to work in timeline, it's kind of good. It's good if you can, because it's a great tool to be able to go back to and use for a bunch of different things. And certainly we're putting it to various different uses. So this these are the conversation setups that Lyndon was kind of just looking at, and these, I'll try and get this set up so it looks pretty much like how I receive it before conversation's been lit, and then we can go through how the lights are applied. Yeah. So imagine Lyndon's come along with his dialogue tool. He's got that whole conversation set up. He's set up poses and gestures, and yeah, this conversation is now ready to go in game. It just doesn't have any lights. So then I come along, and this is what I see. And the first thing to do is set the time of day, because that gives us a better idea of what is going on generally with the lighting. In In this case, morning has no lights because we use it as a pretty much a one-off time of day. But that's the kind of starting point. The next thing is to look at what Lyndon was talking about actually just when we stopped talking about the dialogue, so which is the poses being set up. So I've played, in fact, maybe we should play through the conversation and see what happens. So the first thing that happens in the conversation is that Becky and Vivek stand up. Which means when I'm looking at the preview models, they're sat down. So I know straight away that if I'm going to light this, I need to make sure that they're standing up and they're in the right place. So yeah, I guess if I was lighting conversation, the first thing I would do is play through the conversation and see what kind of stuff I'm going to have to be looking at. And so this is already lit. But we can go back and take them off and look at them again. Sorry, there's no sound. I just realized. But it's a quick conversation.
Subtitles, we're good.
Handy. Good job they were there.
Yeah.
So that's worth noticing. So there's a wide shot at the end of that conversation. So if I've come along and I'm going to light this, I know that it's mostly just back and forth between Becky and Vivek on one side and Donna on the other. There's a cutaway to the handsome man sitting in his chair at one point. And then I know there's a wide shot at the end. And I'll come in and start looking at the lights. There we go. Right. And I've got a tip. There's a tip. If anyone doesn't know, if you Control A and then push the left cursor, it'll minimize everything in your scene, which is something that I use an awful lot, especially when you're working with tons and tons of additive scenes. So every time you open up the project, there'll be loads of stuff open, and it's really hard to kind of find where you're going. So
I'm sure some people spend so much time just minimizing everything manually. So that's
I genuinely, it was about halfway through this whole project before I realized you could Control A and then hit right and left will minimize. And
I had no idea.
It's quite exciting. It's a really good one. And it just instantly tidies up the scene and makes it an awful lot easier to see what you're doing. So I'll hide all this stuff.
So Control A. There you go, guys.
Control A and then the cursor. So left cursor closes everything, and then right cursor opens everything. So, So starting to look at the lights, most of the conversation lighting setups are pretty straightforward. So we were talking there about like the ambient light that you get from the environment setup. Normally you would be talking about 3-point lighting. I think this is technically just 2-point lighting because we don't need an awful lot of fill lights because we're getting that already. So the ambient light that's set is giving everyone a general light, right? So we're not starting from pure black. We're starting from whatever time of day it is. And so mostly what I'm concerned with are the key lights. So from this kind of point, that's our key light, which is quite faint. It's quite faint because in this scenario, I know where the light is coming from. And in a wider shot, just before this conversation, there is light kind of beating in these windows from behind. So I know that the rim light is going to be kind of more important in this one than the key light. So that's going to be kind of your hotter light on the background there, because that's where the light's coming from. And I guess it's worth looking at some of these settings. I don't know how in detail we want to go with the lights, but like an awful lot of my time was spent getting the biases right. I use an extremely low bias. I'm not sure how low that is compared to what people would normally. I mean, it comes in as default at 0.05.
Do you have general prefab lights that you bring into the scene, or
no? There's no. Yeah, I'm always just starting and pretty much just grabbing a spotlight, bringing it in.
Nice.
What might happen is if I've a conversation that's at the same time of day in exactly the same place, I'll maybe duplicate the lights and then drag them back and forth with that. Mm-hmm. But we don't have any initial setups that we would use. And usually the first thing I do is go into the bias and change it. I might be wrong, but I think 0.05 is technically 5 centimeters for the shadow bias. which means anything smaller than 5 centimeters is not going to be casting a shadow.
Yeah.
So in this case, like if we kind of crank this up, you can sort of see there on Vivek's face that his nose is not casting a great shadow. You know, there's a lot of gaps. Like Becky's nose has a big gap in it.
Can you explain to the audience what exactly the bias is and does?
So the bias, well, there you go. The bias, it controls the distance at which. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's the size at which the geometry is not going to be casting a shadow. So in this, the Unity describes it as the distance at which the shadow will be pushed away from the light, which I guess isn't really that helpful a definition. As in, usually what you find is if you've got a very high bias, nothing will cast a shadow unless it's very large. That's basically it. So if you think that the bias is by default it's 0.5, and with the scale of our scene, I'm pretty sure that's about 5 centimeters.
It's about the size of the object rather than the distance from the light.
Yeah. And it's tempting to just set everything to 0. And in this case, we actually would get away with everything being set to 0. But quite often that's where you start getting shadow acne. So if every piece of geometry, no matter the size and no matter the sort of, the topology of it is casting a shadow, then you start getting things that you kind of want to look flat, casting lots of shadows. So you end up getting a lot of noise flickering on the surface. So normally the idea is to set, I guess 0.5 is probably normally going to be the best for larger scenes. But because we're pushing so close in on faces, I had to kind of explore going an awful lot smaller than that. So I would normally go to not 1, like so 0.001, which it does introduce some noise here and there, but I think it's kind of worth it. From my point of view, I think like around the eyes, you start picking out details of the face. And when our character materials aren't covered in sort of blotches and blemishes and kind of surface detail, I think getting a little bit of that sort of more high frequency detailing with the shadows is kind of worth the occasional moment where you do get a little bit of noise around deformations, which does happen. If I think normal bias, just while it's there, I think maybe only affects either larger scale or possibly directional lights. I never really bother adjusting it except on directional light. I'm not sure why. The other thing, just if people are having trouble with their shadow bias, then the other thing to try and adjust is the near plane. Because again, it's one of those things that you would assume to get the best results, you set it as low as possible, because again, you would assume that that's as starting as close to the light as possible. But I suppose because we're dealing with like shadow maps, you're better off making it as small a number as possible that gives you what you want, if that makes sense. So you kind of, or maybe a large as number as possible that gets you what you want. So like you start from that and you push up until you get the shadows that you're after, and then see where it stops working, and then dial it back again. So it's a combination of adjusting the shadow bias and adjusting the near plane to get the sharp shadows that you want. The other thing to pay attention to is your angle. So like you can't just go in and chuck a 90-degree spotlight on something this close and something with these kind of tiny little shadows and expect to get good results out of it. I worked roughly 30 was where I started. If I could go smaller, like if we were really close into a face, then you could go much smaller because obviously you don't need the extra angle. Again, it depends where your light is as well. So if the light's really close, then you can afford a different angle. So it's a sort of a juggling act with all of these different settings to sort of get the detail that you want without too much noise. And I guess so. These are all shadow casting. The key lights that I'm going to be setting up in these characters are all shadow casting. With a nod towards performance, the characters are set up on separate layers. So we have an AI layer, and we have a player layer, and then we have a default layer. And then there's a couple of custom ones as well. But it means that I can put these shadows on Donna, I can put shadows on Vivek and Becky as well, but it's not affecting the background, right? So we're not drawing that environment a bunch of times by having 4 or 5 shadow casting lights on it.
Makes sense.
it maybe only works in setups like this where, we've got this one camera angle. But if you are doing conversations like this, it's an easy way to save a bunch of performance and also get much, much higher quality shadows. Because if you can bring your spotlight into just what you need, you get much sharper shadows like straight away, regardless of the other settings. If you're having to light the scene as well, and your spot angle has to be 120, then you're not going to get those nice sharp shadows. That's just the way it is. You've only got so much to play with. So actually, I was saying we don't use fill lights very often. There's an example of a fill light. The pool, I guess, is kind of unique in that I wanted to emulate that kind of bounce light that comes up of the weird light you get in swimming pools. That weird sort of it is a bounce light. It's that weird diffused kind of light that you get coming out of the water. So there is a little bit of fill mostly in the light setups that are in the pool as well.
Chat pointed out that earlier, that the lighting is so unique. They said it felt like the actual light inside of a pool.
Oh, cool. Thanks very much, chat. So the other thing to add to that kind of, we've a fog quad. So adding in a little bit of mist in there, sort of steam. We've got some shards as well. But yeah, so if we move the camera around and have a look at Donna then as well, we get to have a look at some other stuff. Right, so there's no light on Donna. So Donna has a single spotlight, no rim light, and also there's a cookie on the spot. The reason being is that you're in and out of this environment a lot, and there's lots of like wrought iron fences and gates, and there's a smashed window, there's a tree coming in. There's lots of things that are always in the way of the sunlight that's coming in. So whenever you do see a wide shot with the sun on the floor, it's never just the windows. It's always coming through a bunch of different layers, and it's getting kind of broken up. So whenever someone's standing in that light, I always added some sort of detail. And the easiest way of doing that is to use a cookie. So in this case, can we see that? Maybe not. There we go. So that's what the cookie looks like. And that was made specifically for another window where I wanted to fake the shadows of a window. But since then, it's been used far more often in scenarios like this where I wanted to add, this kind of detail on Donna. So you can see there what it's doing. I think it kind of sells the notion that the light is there's shadows being cast by all sorts of bits of metal and the rest of the building. It kind of just sets her a bit more in the scene. And also it means you don't have to pay, well, on the one hand, you don't have to pay for the cost of casting the shadows from the environment, which is the other way of doing it. You could place your spotlight behind a piece of fence or behind a piece of, this up here. We could set the spotlight up there and cast the shadows, but it won't be as sharp as that, and it'll cost you a lot more than just sticking a cookie on it. And also, I don't think there's going to be many people, possibly Stevie, the environment artist, who would be able to spot that the light does not match up exactly with the environment. I don't think you would read that as being a strange shape. I think you would just sort of see it as a shadow cast by something in the scene that you can't see off shot.
Yeah, no, not at all. I definitely did not know. That's a really clever trick, actually. It looks great.
And we do the same thing again with this light in the background. So again, the temptation would be to add in a directional light or to add in a spotlight with shadows on it and use the environment to cast those shadows. But given that we've got, there we are, we've got depth of field on this shot as well, there's no point. It would be too expensive. So I add a different cookie, again, windows again. But they're just shapes. They're just square shapes with a little bit of kind of high frequency detail, white blocks, and then you can get that background detail. Without actually having. So I mean, from this angle, it looks ridiculous. It doesn't look like anything at all. But I think in this shot, especially if you take a bit of time and kind of line it up as well, you can sort of you can imagine that. So I spent a bit of time and made sure that there was no light on the very background, because the the second floor would be blocking that out. And maybe try to line up one of these darker lines with one of the pillars or something like that. It doesn't take much to sort of sell the notion that there's shadow detail in there. And it's so much cheaper to do that with a cookie than it is to do it with actual cast shadows, and you get much sharper edges.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good, really quick segue. I know we're keeping you guys a really long time, and there's a few more things I want to talk about, but like just really quickly, like that's a really good optimization trick. And a lot of like you said, you know, like you've been able to do a lot of things to save on performance and make this game not too costly. And I wonder if you can talk about that, like some of the performance considerations, because this game is released on PC and all consoles and Switch, and it still looks really great, like on Switch as well.
We can, shall I go straight to the more broad kind of optimization stuff away from the lighting, or?
Yeah, let's do
let's do that.
Okay.
We can touch on that, and then we'll jump into the audio section after that.
I think. Right, so. Bark. Okay. I think I have another slide.
Nice.
Yeah, so super quickly, I'll not spend too long. This looks like a whole sort of pile of text, but briefly, the process we went through when we realized that we were going to be porting onto Switch, and the first steps in trying to get the game running on Switch, we started with the Unity's built-in stuff, right? So the quality settings, that was the first port of call, because they're usually quite broad, they're global changes, and they're easy to set per platform. So I'll open the quality settings up and we can have a look at them, but just like, that's the first thing you do before you start worrying about anything else. Like, make sure you've set, you know, you can turn down the shadow distance, you can turn down the quality settings, you can have your texture, you know, it'll save you a pile of memory. And that's like just the first thing to start looking at. We did implement some level of detail system, which we hadn't before. We didn't really see a need for it before, but there are specific reasons for doing that on Switch. And yeah, I think I mentioned the layers before. I can touch on a couple of these other things as well. You can spend months looking at the types of batching, like dynamic batching and static batching and GPU instancing and all of that kind of stuff. We can touch on it if we have time. One of the things I think to be aware of before anything else is try and make sure you're not breaking it. So like Unity does a really good job with the static batching in that you can batch a ton of stuff and it keeps the frustum culling working. So like the camera, the angle of the camera that points out, if you built your entire environment as one object, it would cut down on your draw calls. But as you're moving through the scene, there's no optimization for where the camera's looking. You're always going to be drawing that piece of geometry every time. What Unity does with the static batching then is if you use the static batching, it will reduce the number of draw calls, but you still get the bonus of frustum culling as well, which is impossible to set up on your own, or it would be very tricky to set up on your own. So try and make sure that you're not breaking that by either having really inefficient, huge, geometry that Unity can't break up, or also there's a couple of other things that will break it. For example, not having the object on when you start. I can show that in a scene in a little minute, it makes more sense, but because we're turning things off and on an awful lot, we realized that a lot of the environments were off when Unity was doing the batching process. So we would then turn them on later, expecting them to have been batched, and they wouldn't, because obviously Unity couldn't find them to begin with. So it's a simple fix. You just make sure that those things are on, and then you put a little script on it that says turn that thing off once this section is done. Like turn this off once we've started, kind of basically. And that fixes it. It means Unity can batch it, and then you can switch it on and off afterwards. But it's worth making sure that you're getting the benefit of these things, and not getting in the way. There were a few things that we had to, or that we chose to compromise on Switch. Stuff like motion blur. I think that was possibly a decision that was made quite early on, in that was something that wasn't necessary. That was something that we were happy to get the gain from removing back, and weren't too upset about losing that as an option on Switch. I can't remember the exact specifics, but it was a nice little chunk of frame time that we just got back by turning that off. I guess that's the next step. Like if there are things that you can happily live without, get rid of them. That's going to make you the biggest gain straight away. Is if you can get rid of something entirely, then you don't have to worry about it. we ended up hitting a limit on the number of skinned mesh renderers. I think Lyndon kind of mentioned that earlier, possibly. We had a crowd system that was using skinned mesh renderers, and the Switch was not happy with the sheer number of skinned mesh renderers that we were using. So we used, I can't remember the name of the software. Someone's going to have to help me.
Mesh Animator.
Mesh Animator. So we implemented, or Ed implemented this. I think a third-party tool, but possibly augmented with lots of other kind of interesting things that's more magic behind the scenes. Basically, breaking those animations down into I think some sort of vertex animation, which saves on the CPU overhead and saves on a whole bunch of other stuff without having to have those full mesh, boned animated characters running about in the scene. You can kind of just boil that down to something a bit more simple. Sorry, Lynn.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that these were used for the background characters because background characters were doing very simple animation. In fact, only thing they were doing, other than standing still, which we actually used just mesh, no animation at all, total statues when those characters stood still. When there are characters walking, we would just have maybe a 1 second, maybe 2 second, it might have been just been 1 second animation loop. So, just for step, 1 foot, left foot, and then when it gets back to the loop. And then every frame of that, I guess, became just like a mesh. And we would then be able to drive the motion using a spline that we could map around the world. So you could just have characters just walking around, and they'd just be walking on the spot, but they'd be moving at the correct speed, so it gave the impression that they're walking. So that was incredibly cheap from a performance, and it did mean it added extra memory cost because you've now not just got one mesh, you've got maybe 60 meshes just for one character. But we made the meshes, the background characters, stylistically, we made them not anywhere near as detailed as the player characters or the NPCs. They don't have faces, so there's no detail there on the faces. But we wanted the background characters to not get distracted by them. We didn't want it to be like a ghost town, so we needed the background characters. But we also didn't want to, spend resources on making those characters. And also, we wanted to make it clear that these aren't playable characters and NPCs. And so, even to a degree that maybe you saw this in the playthrough, if you walk through a character, there's no sort of avoidance tech or anything. They're not sort of looking out for you and walking out of the way. They'll just clip straight through you. And so a simple solution to that, I think we pitched this idea from Persona 5, is that we just had the material kind of fade out as you get into the character. And that's something that we did for Switch, but actually we just kept it for all the other platforms, which is part of the reason why we did everything in-house rather than take the optimization to an outsourced studio, because we were still in the process of building the game because we did have the option of doing that, but the game was still being built. And so we would have to be in sync with them, and effectively it would have to be them coming on as another team member, group of team members. And, that's managing people and having to be in sync with the project or peripherals. Actually, we kind of thought we could do it all in-house. We had the resources to do it. We thought we had the bandwidth to do it, which we did. And so that's the decision was made. So I guess it's sort of like Last Stop is made a Switch first, and then everything is up-res for PC, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4.
It was on Switch and then ported to PC.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I always think that's the easiest way of doing it, making for
right.
If you're going to do it, I think it would be different if the game came out and then you make a port to Switch after the fact. you wouldn't have to worry about all these things. But if you're going to release like sim shit on all these different platforms, I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. We've heard so many teams take such different approaches. Some did, outsourced it. They thought it was way easier so they can focus on the game the way that they intended it. Other teams, did it all in-house and have mentioned how terrible it was. And they were like,
I can
never
see
do it
how
again.
that could go like that, yeah.
Your approach of starting with the port, quote unquote. Yeah.
I think in a way we were maybe lucky that some of the stuff that we were happy to compromise on weren't things that were inherently important to the game. So like I sort of saying to Lyndon before, like if it had been something like with the audio, if it had been, we couldn't have the dialogue or something, like if it had been something to do with the story that we had to compromise on, then that would have been a different kind of scenario. But some visual kind of compromises I think are kind of okay, especially in a game that's story driven. If you're happy enough with how it looks and you keep the tone visually, then I think some of those compromises are okay. Yeah. I'm just kind of this is the park scene, which is where I spent most of the time trying to get like the game working on Switch. Like this was the absolute nightmare scenario for Switch because it's full of foliage. I think if you read like anything about optimizing Switch, like the first thing that everyone starts crying about is like semi-transparent materials, that cutout shader, and the sort of the overdraw problem and all of that kind of jazz. So this scene, as you can see in the bottom, so that's like the kind of the game camera. We're constantly looking through like hundreds and hundreds of pieces of footage, and it's kind of the nightmare scenario. I can show you quickly. I don't know how much. Do we still have some time to go through, or do we kind of want to start rattling through stuff quicker?
I'm actually just restarting my computer.
Okay.
But you've got maybe like.
So go for it, and then we can jump into the audio after that.
I've got a tip. I don't have too many tips, but here's a good tip. If you're optimizing stuff, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a straightforward way to preview frustum culling. So like what the camera sees and what it's culling. If you get your occlusion baking window up and just set the settings to something really high, so you're not worried about the occlusion culling at all, and do a quick bake, and then set it to visualize and turn off the occlusion culling, you're left with the frustum culling. So you can move your camera around and it will show you precisely what is being drawn for that particular camera, which is really handy if you're trying to get trying to work out what exactly is being drawn in your scene for that camera. And actually, like if you look, there's an error there. So those houses are now off camera, but at a certain point when I'm moving that around, they pop back up again.
They're still in, yeah.
It's not a problem for this shot because we're turning them off. But if you were going through your scene, you'd know that, I don't know, maybe in the FBX there's a stray face or something maybe over there on that side that's coming back into shot, or maybe there's a light casting some weird shadow or something like that. That's one way of visualizing that type of culling, and that's
a great tip.
Again, it's one of those things that Unity does for you, and if you can just get that working, it's always going to be a bonus. You don't have to do any extra work. Like Unity does a lot of that, and it works with the static batching as well.
Cypher in the chat is saying, "Wait, that's a custom tool, right?" I believe that's just the in-editor.
The thing we're looking at here.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's just so if you go to window rendering occlusion culling, you can drag this little window out.
That's available to you, Cypher.
Yeah. So the trick is to just do a really rough bake. You kind of not worried about what the contents of the occlusion bake is. Just whatever goes quick, and then just turn the occlusion culling off in your little preview window, and it'll show you what's being culled. So we do. I don't know. I'm happy to sort of park things. I'm also happy to talk a little bit more about some of the more like kind of scary looking optimization stuff. Like I've got some screenshots of the frame debugger and that kind of thing if we wanted to have a look at those. But I didn't realize quite how late it got.
I think while Lyndon is opening his up, if you want to just show that screenshot,
we can have
show
we should definitely show it. Cypher in chat's like, optimization is the fun part of game dev. That's where we get to do the cool tricks. Have it done a lot in the past.
So the smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's something very satisfying about it as well. Like when you get something that looks the same but is performing better. There's something extremely satisfying about kind of sneaking stuff in, I guess. Like you feel like you're kind of getting one over on the computer. Yeah, I guess. Again, we probably don't have time to go wading into this. But that overdraw issue, which is one of the sort of main issues of like graphics performance on Switch, that I don't know if you can see the frame rate there. So we're at about 20 frames per second on that shot. So I'm looking for an extra 10 frames per second, and it's one of the few times like I find like frame debugging and going through these tools. Like, so this is NVIDIA's frame debugger that you use in combination with Switch, and they're I find them overwhelming. There's a lot of information that just comes at you all at once. But if you can get them working, if you can get to this stage where you can see the sort of breakdown of a single frame, it is really helpful to be able, even for someone like me who maybe doesn't know what each of those, like those color-coded bits are my working out. Like, so I kind of drawn a little pink line around something and then taken a note of what I think that is and sort of tested that out. Being able to see how long those things are taking per frame is the best way to kind of to focus your energy when you're optimizing something like this. So in this particular case, I was trying to work out whether having transparent leaves as opposed to the cutout leaves was actually going to be better performing for us. And in the end, it wasn't. Like, so having the cutout was fine. It was worth having the cutout in order to push the foliage into deferred rendering. So if something's transparent, you can't render it in deferred, it automatically gets rendered in forward. And the hit from going from transparent to cutout was worth the gain from moving from forward to deferred, if that makes sense. So that's not something I would have ever thought, because the perceived wisdom is that the cutout is the worst thing to do. You don't want to use that. Find an alternative. So it took me to go through and check and make sure that I was doing the right thing. And sure enough, we've got, I think that's a screenshot of moving all of those leaves to cutout, but moving them into deferred rendering rather than forward. And you can see there that it's 29 point. I mean, it's nearly 30 frames per second. I'm not going to feel too bad. There's a 0.1 there. But yeah, I mean, that's a tricky process and something that we could probably talk for a long time about, but maybe maybe not now.
Yeah, we'll need to do some some dev talks with you, because this is like all very juicy stuff. But yeah, why don't we, since Lyndon got his computer running again?
Yeah,
we're ready to go.
Yeah, let's take a look at
Lyndon's screen share.
Sure, yeah. So I was going to talk about how we use music in Last Stop, and I was just going to. There's a lot to talk about here, so I was just going to whittle it down to just showing a section of the game which makes use of an interactive music system that kind of showcases a bunch of tricks that is kind of used throughout the game. So I'll just play this, but maybe I'll just preface it by sort of describing what's going to happen, and then saying what I wanted to, what my vision was for the music and what I wanted to use it to, and then when we'll dive into the audio software Fmod, which I used to do it, and I'll describe how I did it. So this is a section, it's the second chapter of Paper Dolls, which is the body swap story, and body swap happens, the actual physical body swap happens at the end of the previous chapter. So now he's come back to, John has swapped into Jack's body. He's come back to his flat with his daughter Molly. He answers the door, doesn't know who he is, obviously, because he's in a different body. He has to navigate that conversation. And so he then opens the door. She lets him in, and then there's a conversation with Jack, who is behind the door to his bedroom, and he has to sort of persuade him to open the door because he's like freaking out. and then eventually he sort of freaks out and slams the door on him. So there's 3 moments there I really wanted to capture, and it was I wanted there to be a moment where the music drops out for comic effect, just because there's a line of dialogue that John says just before he's let into the flat. So I wanted there to be a drop out in the audio, so this line could be sort of punctuated by the silence, and then the music kick in again with a burst of energy. And then the moment that he managed to persuade Jack to open the door, I wanted that to be pointed out by the music. So I'll sort of commentate on when that happens, so you can see that what effect the music's happening on the visuals. And then the last thing, I just wanted the ending of the music to be to punctuate the door slam, and so we'll see how that goes. So I think that is music. Oh no. Okay, let's play again. You hear that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Molly, you're okay?
Are you here to see my dad? I think he's sick.
Wait, I'm your dad.
No, you're Jack.
I'm Jack.
Why are you being so weird? Have you got some more of our post or something?
Could I come in? You know, just to see how your dad's doing.
Okay, I guess you're not a stranger.
Okay, so
He's locked himself in his bedroom.
John's line's coming up here.
Oh, brilliant.
And then the music kicks in.
Oh God! Oh God! What the hell has happened to me?
Hello? Are you okay in there?
No, I'm really not. I'm having a terrible nightmare. I'm horribly disfigured and fat old.
Keep your voice down. You're scaring my daughter.
Who the hell are you? Why do you sound like me?
Open the door.
Okay, so now the music's changing to when he reacts and opens the door.
Jesus H. Christ! You've stolen my body!
You've stolen my body.
Wait. I thought I recognised this face in the mirror. If this is your body, that must make you the bloke who brings the post!
Seriously? My name's John. We've met like 10 times. Look, this is not important right now.
Help! Help!
Shut up.
Okay, now here's the ending. Yeah.
That's great.
Amazing.
I love that first one, the music dropping out and then starting back up again. I've played that scene I don't know how many hundreds of times.
For me, it's the screaming that makes it.
That little dropout was so worth whatever work you have to do to get it to work, because it's awesome.
Show you how
I think you're going to show us the same thing in Fmod, right? The program that you're using to achieve this.
Yeah, right. So I'll just so I'm just going to link into the conversation system as well. So just line that up as well. When my computer crashed, it kind of I had obviously set up.
Did the dialogue tool do it?
It might have been the dialogue tool.
See, this is why I'm scared of it.
Chat is saying they love the face movements, audio aside. Has great comedic timing.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the music cue. So I mean, just prove it. In fact, I'll just raise that up a bit louder. So, I mean, I suppose I should just talk a little bit about what an interactive music system is for those who don't know. So, oftentimes you might just have a piece of music and it plays and it loops and it stops. But an interactive music system, I think, is anything that the game then wants the game commands the music to do something else and change at the command of what's happening in the game. So, the game talking to Fmod, the music system. So a really basic version of this would be, I have one loop playing, and I now want another loop to play. And I can show you a really basic mock-up of what that's like. So imagine none of this stuff here existed here. It's just one clip here and one clip here by this enter flat. And I'll go over these parameters later, but just to get this working, just to demonstrate why I think you need to, why this doesn't always just work out of the box. So here's a piece of music playing. Now, it says, okay, now transition. And it just sounds weird. There's no consideration to the musicality of that change. It's just the piece has a rhythm to it, and it's just changed. It's like a drummer suddenly going out of time, starting playing something else. And so for the type of music system I wanted, we had to be more creative than that. However, I should put some caveats, but this basic system is fine as long as there's a couple of examples where you could do this and it'd be totally fine. If the opening music was not rhythmic and it was sparse, ambient, and so therefore had not any sort of pulse to it, you couldn't really tap your foot to it, then leaving that transition to another piece of music at an arbitrary point in that is probably fine, because you're not going to really know that you've gone out of time, because time is, you don't really know what the tempo of the track is anyway. And so I do that. There's plenty of times where I've done that, and there's definitely benefits to doing that, because what we'll get into with this is that the drawbacks of having a more sophisticated music system is that it's not always as reactive as you'd want it to be, because it has to wait around for the next musically appropriate point for it to do its transition. So doing that system is good if you've got if the music makes sense for it. So if it's like an ambient piece of music, and it could go into like a rhythmic track after that would be fine, because it's not two rhythms clashing together. Another way that, and this is an example of this, I suppose, is in combat action games, that you can do two rhythmic tracks that instantly change, as long as you mask that transition with a loud noise or an explosion or like a musical sting. And yeah, you do get this. So you might have like a combat game which you want the music to transition on the last hit, where you sort of slash the boss and suddenly the music changes. And on that hit, you might get away with just putting like a big explosion or something in it. And then that's a distraction taking you away from the fact that underneath all that, the music has just been doing some very dodgy stuff. And when the sound kind of, the big explosion sound evaporates, you don't really recognize that you changed in a weird way. And so that's actually, and I would definitely go that route, because it's the simplest route and it's the less effort, and it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time making a music system if you can just do that. However, I can't exactly just put an explosion in this music section. So I had to think of other ways that the music could transition musically. I will just go through this to explain sort of what's going on. So all these little objects here are containers of audio files. And it contains audio files that I've bounced out individually in the music software that I use, Logic. And this intro one is just a long piece of music, so there's no interactivity going on here at all. That's fine, because I don't need to worry about the game the music needing to transition to anything. until later. At least I know, because I've timed it out, at least 20 seconds. So it takes at least 20 seconds for that cutscene of John walking up to knocking on the door of Molly and the bunch of dialogue interactions that you're having with Molly before it gets to the point where John says his last line. And it's probably more than 20 seconds. It was at least 20 seconds. So in that time, I can do whatever I want. I can have music with long phrases, music that changes progression, chord progression. If I was to do that, knowing that I had to transition out of that music cue at any point, it'd be difficult because if you cut into a music phrase which is going on for several bars, maybe several seconds, 5-10 seconds, it's going to sort of sound weird, and because that music phrase is going to overlap. And so the way around that is to do all the kind of long phrases you want to do in the sections where it's not going to be interactive. And then when it gets close to this section where you need the music to transition, start pairing it back to as small as components as you can. So here is a music section where it's just 2 bars of music. And notice how it does actually, and I'll just make this clear by putting the tempo here. So it does actually, it doesn't just chop off at the 2 bar limit. It doesn't do this. Because that would sound weird. So you do have to bounce it out with these tails to make it sound natural. Just a little, just makes the whole process a bit more difficult. You can't just bounce out the whole track and then edit it after the fact. You have to actually bounce out these clips manually. So here we have these clips every 2 bars, and that comes to about 2-3 seconds. I'm saying that every 3 seconds there is a musical change that could happen, because that's when the music is sort of got to the end of its rhythm and you can change. So, I mean, if I were to play it, these are all chopped into bits, but to play it, you know, because it sounds like it's all one piece. But like I was saying, you can at the end of that 2 bars, it can transition to something else. And so I'll just go back to Unity.
Just to interject, like when we were talking earlier about those moments when you're doing these things and the other members of the team are watching someone and thinking, I didn't realize there was so much. This is one of those
That's
moments.
happening right now, yeah.
It's really awesome to have a look inside F1 and see I've taken so much of the music for granted, I think.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
It's because it doesn't exist in Unity. I'm the only one that really looks at it. So no one will even see what it looks like. So, I mean, we've been over the dialogue tools. So, and we touched upon these mid-dialogue events. Basically, let me bring up the script. This is going to open Visual Studio. I mean, it's not the time to go, oh, it's massive. I need to resize this. Yeah. In the script, this conversation, and there's not enough time to go over all this stuff, but just accept that that conversation is being triggered by this. And ahead of that coroutine, which is essentially what the dialogue tool is these setups, I suppose, of the triggers that are going to happen in that conversation. So the trigger mid-dialogue event of muse change parameter, which is triggered here just before Molly says a line, okay, I guess you're not a stranger. That is saying, okay, change this parameter called state. And I tend to name all the parameter states just to ease. And it's saying the value is 1.1f. And when it does, and so it's saying do that. And so, okay, so what happens if the code tells fmod to do that? Well, in this is a transition region, and it will transition to this marker called end molly, which sounds a bit dark, but it's just probably couldn't end that. But that marker is here. So when that transition happens, it will go to here. Except the conditions are it needs to be between the value of the state, which is a parameter that is linked in the script, between the values of 1 and 2. So because I set it to 1.1, it's definitely between 1 and 2. And another condition is that it will wait until these quantization intervals. And I've set that to be every 2 bars. The reason I've done that is because these are every 2 bars. I could change that to every 1 bar. However, and the smaller the better, because it's like if you imagine there has to be a wait here from I could trigger, it's an arbitrary amount, like it's unknown when this will get triggered because there's player input here, so we don't know. So it could, at its worst, could be triggered here and you have to wait that amount of time, which is roughly 3 seconds. So I could have made it less than that, but there is like a push and pull of like, the smaller you make the sections, the less interesting the music becomes. And I'll show you an example in a moment why that's the case. So I kept it, I thought actually it's kind of acceptable to wait 3 seconds because it's going to play and then Molly's going to say her thing. And Molly's line is at least 3 seconds long. So I know that that's going to happen inside her saying that line. So I'm kind of safe knowing that.
That's why there's never a gap there.
Yeah, exactly.
There's always something going on. That's cool.
And so when it gets to, and I'll demonstrate this now. When it gets to, okay, now it's going to change. Now this is what I mean about boring music. So this is really granular. This is every 2 beats. So to play this on its own would sound ridiculous.
Wow.
And I'm just bouncing these out.
Right.
And, you know, you don't want to hang around in this music too long. So it's the reason why this is kind of fine, because I knew that it's going to transition after Molly says her line is only going to be playing in the time it takes for the player to make a decision.
Right.
Which
Just limited.
Actually, it's limited anyway because it's a dialogue
Yeah.
timer. And once the player makes a decision, and the same for all of these, there is another music change. So this one actually is called parameter 5, which changes the value to 5.1. The reason it's 5 is just because I've over the time I've been working on this queue, I've added extra stuff, and so I think this one is 3, and then there's another one here which is 4. And so I must have done this one late in the day. So I did this one, injected this in, so that's why it's 5. Maybe it's not really that important. It's any number really that you could trigger. So yeah, this one will trigger the parameter somewhere between 5 and 6. It will then go to end Molly, which is, sorry, it won't go to end Molly. It will go to whatever's written here, which is intro end. And this is just a simple cadence beat. And so you can hear this. Right? And when that happens, there is
so simple but effective.
Yeah. It waits. We have a new flag here, which is waiting for marker, and it's waiting for the marker called intro end, which is what this is called. So it doesn't just trigger because it's got this wait here. I want to wait until that piece of music, that note is triggered before John's line happens. So that's why I made this as short as possible because after committing that dialogue choice, I don't want there to be kind of 5 second wait before he actually says it. But like, what's this? Like less than a second? Yeah, maybe 1 second, and that seems acceptable all the time before, you might just be thinking about what to say before he says it. And then the dialogue plays, and because the dialogue options are all roughly the same length, I know that they will all definitely play here. And in fact, I got the WAV files of the dialogue to make sure of this, but all of the dialogues finish within this bit of silence. So I've actually baked this silence into the track, so the comedic silence. And then what happens in the script is that after the, we get this end here, that ends this routine. And then the next thing it does is load to the level, which is John's flat interior. And that kind of coincides with this. And then we're back to a amount of time where we don't need to worry about transitioning. So now I know that the walk between John and the door, and before the section where Jack opens the door, is at least this amount of time, 30 seconds. So the same thing's happening again. It's just playing this section up until it gets to a very familiar repetitive section, which you might notice is the same as this. But it's just with the added percussion, because that sort of suits the energy that's been built up in the track. And so the difference here is because the next section, which is getting triggered, doesn't have to be so frame specific. I'm just basically queuing up a music moment when he opens the door. I decided that I will just trigger the parameter change, and because it's a second, I'll trigger it at the end of the conversation. So these things don't have to be done within the dialogue tool, they can be done whenever. So I'm doing that. How am I doing it? It is here. So that conversation plays, and then after the conversation, it just straight away triggers this 3.1. Well, between 3 and 4. And then it will play this at the exact same moment that it's triggering the cuts. Well, not exact. It'll be a difference of 1 second, but it's fine because I said there's not a lot of synchronicity to worry about because it's someone opening the door. And this again is we don't have to worry about the transition until at least 25 seconds. And that's why there's lots of much more interesting music going on here than there is compared to, say, here, which is just this. And so you sort of pick your moments where you get to flourish and do a lot of exciting music.
Yeah.
And that eventually filters into something repetitive again, slightly less repetitive than what was there before, but that's basically teeing up for the end of the conversation, which I will.
It's such an interesting way to compose music. So you're not thinking of it as just like a track, but you're thinking of it as like bits, like these modular pieces that can be like placed at different points depending on the situation, right? Like how do you approach that?
I approach it by thinking about the moments that I want to hit to begin with. So it was those 3 moments: the dramatic silence, the music changing when the door is open, and the ending having some sort of punctuation to it rather than it just like fading out or just fizzling out. And once you know that, and I suppose just from experience, what you know is possible, and knowing that I'm going to have to set up that music cue in order to make that transition, you sort of prepare the music to go into something that's simple enough that it can get out of it quickly, which is very sort of dun 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 dun. And you could. I have worked in the past where I don't worry about any of that to begin with. I just, because the most important thing is the character of the music and the overall vibe that the music's trying to give off. And then you can sort of back engineer, I suppose. If you come up with a nice little flourish and think, oh, actually, that's going to be too long over this section, you can start to edit it and whittle it down and make things shorter. So it's definitely like, kind of like playing 4D chess. You've got all these things up in the air. And I think that it's worth noting that it's helped by the fact that I'm the person scripting this as well. I'm the person writing these conversations.
Right.
So I don't need to butt heads against the writer who doesn't want me to be putting these weights and things in my style. So I'm kind of in control of it all. So it kind of, I can imagine it being a much more complicated situation if I suddenly make a change and I have to convince someone to make the change in the dialogue tool and then convince them that we're going to have this little wait here and then them not understand that. It slow down the whole process. So it does help out if I'm doing start to finish the whole thing.
It's kind of amazing how many, I mean, I must have played that easily hundreds of times. And at no point did it ever occur to me that you were making any of those decisions based on something technical. Like when the music kind of becomes more just the beat in the background or whatever, it feels like that was, by design for that moment. Like it feels comedic, like it feels like it fits in perfectly. It doesn't feel like you did that in order to transition to the next, but it feels like you did that as a creative choice, and it just happens to work when you put it over the scene and you pick a response randomly. It absolutely, I just take it for granted that the music is just following along without even thinking about how complicated it is to get it to match all those moments.
I mean, I always think that I would take another thing that to answer your previous question, how do I approach it? I would take a video maybe of playthrough and then score it like I would score film.
Can you do that? That'd be so much fun.
and then go, okay, how am I actually going to do this? Because it's not easy to write music film, but it's where you are. The timeline is locked, and so you can kind of do whatever you want, without worrying about if it's actually going to work. Whereas this all has to sort of fit into some system, and there's some drawbacks to having this game waiting around for music. Basically, it's just about the music is out of sync, most likely, and so you just have to wait until the music gets back in sync and then the game proceeds. This is the same, I mean, anyone who's played Virginia, is this kind of what we did on Virginia as well, except the difference is that we didn't have dialogue, so it was, I mean, there's a whole other thing to talk about writing music around dialogue, but I won't go into that. But it's kind of the same tricks we were using in Virginia, where music was transitioning at animation moments to sort of tell the story musically. And it's anything that you can do to make it appear, just like what Nick said, to make it appear like this has just been scored to seem like it was always meant to be like that. But it's in a video game. And so I don't want people to worry about all this stuff. I just want people to be just enjoy the fact that the music is reacting to the game. I always think that it's sort of, if you imagine if the music wasn't reacting to the game, it'd just be a piece of music over the whole thing. And so you wouldn't get those moments where dropping out for comedic comedy, or the music kind of like being with you when Jack opens that door, which feels like it feels like it's not, the music isn't just sort of outside of the game, it's like inside the game. And I love that, and I think that it's definitely like challenging to pull off, but I think when it all comes together, it is worth it. I mean, like I'll just finish this up now. Like the ending is very similar to what we've seen before. I will just sort of say that when it transitions to this last bit here, I'm basically just teeing up this cue here at the outro plays precisely at the moment when that cutscene plays, which is starts with John saying, "What the hell are you doing?" and then Jack closes the door. And I made sure that the door slam was on the last beat, so there, and so it's like slam. And it still amazes me in a way that works every time. It's kind of mad when you think that you're writing music and you don't have control about when these things are going to happen because someone else is in control of.
You're just hoping that they'll line it up properly.
Yeah, but because of the system, it will work every time because of these short waits.
Right.
And so I mean, we're doing. This is just it was a good example of it, but there's lots of other examples where we're doing kind of the same thing throughout. Lots of different sort of ways of, I suppose, triggering the music. It doesn't have to just be in the dialogue tool. It could be anywhere in the game. It could be for a trigger box, or it could be anywhere in the script. But principles are the same. So that was, I suppose, an overview of the sort of music system.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's reminding me of, sorry to take it back to point and click games and another LucasArts game at that, but Monkey Island 2 had the same, was I think the first time they introduced like iMuse, is like one of their visual music systems. And it was just so revolutionary at the time that things would change on screen based on what you were seeing. And it's like, you know, I've like watched the commentaries with them or replayed the special version where they have commentary about that. It's like, and then like now watching you talk about this and like super advanced system composing.
Well, it's interesting because in a way we've sort of taken a step back from then, because at that time, I don't know loads about that system, but I think I understand it, but it uses MIDI, I think, doesn't use audio. And so MIDI is much easier to work with. It's essentially a more granular version of this. It's every single note is triggering an audio and it has a tail, and so you can transition out of it without having to worry about bouncing out lots of I mean, it would be ridiculous to bounce out every single note in this to its own clip. It would probably sound rubbish as well. And MIDI, let's be honest, sounds a bit rubbish now, but because I shouldn't say it sounds rubbish, it sounds mechanical, which is by design. And so you do get away with having a huge amount of control over it. I mean, it'd be kind of cool to build a synthesizer in a game engine and just use MIDI. I mean, that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Oh, yeah, that would be really cool.
I'm going to go back and play Monkey Island with a newfound kind of, interest in how the music transitions when you're going in and out of like the bar. And
I mean, the classic thing is in Sonic where it just changes the tempo. Just the value it changes the tempo. That's something which you just can't do with audio without it sort of
of course,
audio quality. And so there are things I do wonder whether there might be a renaissance of bringing back MIDI, but I don't know, improving the output of it, like improving the sound drivers and things. It'd be kind of cool with that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the deep dive. Thank you for coming on to this stream. That was amazing. A lot of great details. Thank you for everyone for sticking around for 4 whole hours.
We were so worried we weren't going to be able to fill an awful lot of time. I'm so sorry, everyone who's like...
it's great.
No, everyone loved
before
it.
The stream, Nick was like, I'm just going to roll through all of this. I'm like, don't you worry.
Yeah, it's so funny
to talk about.
We did so many... We've had so many chats before this. It's like, do we have enough for 1 hour? I'm like, I think we're good. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. This completes another week of Creator Spotlight. And thank you to the guests, Nick and Lyndon, for coming to talk about Last Up. Again, the game is coming out in 2 whole days. So go wishlist it and buy it. Wishlisting helps them a lot. So please do so.
I'm going to drop the link again in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. But the video will be available after. If you missed anything, there's a lot of stuff there. I'm sure you want to go check it out again. But we will also be uploading it onto YouTube and sending out emails to people and stuff like that. So don't worry, you didn't miss anything. We'll be back next week TBD. We'll see what stream's going to come up. But there's a lot of great streams coming up in the next 2 months. Remember to follow the channel so you can keep up to date with all the Creator Spotlight stuff that's coming out. Yeah, but also follow our Twitter where we will tell you every week what's going to come out. Thanks again, Lyndon and Nick. Thanks for coming by. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, chat, for being so awesome today too, asking so many good questions. Oh my gosh, it was great. Yeah, I think that's why you guys kept them around so long. There were so many great questions. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.